But you just leap right in. All right. We will call this meeting of the City Council of the City of San Carlos to order. Would you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Jeff, do we have any changes to the order of the agenda?
No changes from staff this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Any change requests from the dais? All right, seeing none, for the benefit of audience members, by law, when we're going to be doing either Jeff's or Greg Rubin's annual performance review and compensation review, we have to start our closed session from a regularly scheduled meeting. So we actually are going to be adjourning now into closed session. We will come back into open session at 8 o'clock. That is correct, right, Greg?
Yes.
Even if we end our discussions early, we will not start until 8 o'clock.
That's correct.
That is a firm start time. So we are adjourned to closed session.
Great job.
Well, that's actually kind of refreshing. You can do a lap around the room without running into anything. All right, we will reconvene from closed session. Greg, report from closed session, please. Thank you. That brings us to item 6, council communications and announcements. Matt.
I don't have anything. Thank you.
All right. Bob?
Last 2 weeks. Did I go anywhere? Did I have any meetings?
I haven't seen you.
Mr. Mayor, I don't think I have anything to report either.
All right, fair enough. Cameron?
Thank you, Mark. The main official business over the last 3 weeks, I attended a CCAG Airport Land Use Committee meeting where we approved the Half Moon Bay Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan and forwarded it on to the full CCAG body for approval. Next up for that is taking on the San Carlos Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan, which is the process has already started, and we've asked for a presentation for council in the coming months. I also attended a youth commission meeting last week. As you know, San Carlos Youth Commission is appointed by the city council member, which is made up of youth from the community, and we brainstormed about having the youth commission do some research among their peers, come up with some ideas for making San Carlos a more youth-friendly city. So I'm interested to see what they have to come up with, and we'll be back with more information in the future.
Thank you, Cameron. Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few things. After our last council meeting, I attended the Grand Boulevard Initiative Task Force meeting. It was actually this time it was held back down in Palo Alto. Also had a Housing Endowment and Regional Trust meeting. Also had the opportunity to attend the Taste of Italy, event, which was at Casa de Flores a couple of weeks ago. That was a great event and a nice venue, and my hat's off to all the Sister City Committee people for doing that and for inviting us. Gail and I had a great time. And then last Thursday, I attended, along with the mayor and the city manager and the city attorney, press conference up at the California Public Utilities Commission on the issues of PG&E and the Public Utilities Commission. And as everybody's probably read in the press, president of the PUC has announced his retirement at the end of the year. And I think that other than my wife's high school reunion, I won't say the number of years, but I bring that up because she went to Carlmont, as did I. So we had a great time. Thanks.
Thank you, Ron. Well, I was at one of those press conferences with Ron, and one that was a couple of days before that involving PG&E. I would describe Commissioner Peavy announcing he was not going to seek reappointment as good news for the citizens of California and a good first step, but hopefully the steps will keep on coming because we do need to see some improvements at the PUC. I also attended the most recent City County Association of Governments meeting and enjoyed volunteering at the Glass and Tokens booth at the Art and Wine Fair over the weekend. Once again, it was you can always be sure that that weekend in October will be a nice warm day in San Carlos, and it was true to form this year. Jeff, do you have anything that you'd add from the staff side?
I do, Mr. Mayor. It's been 3 weeks since our last council meeting, just because of how the calendar works out between September and October. So on September 19th and 20th, we did have 59 volunteers from the San Carlos Lumberjacks baseball and Recon USA helped to renovate significant portions of Vista Park. So thank you to all those who graciously volunteered their time to help out. In terms of water conservation, this is something where the council in the past has set a 20% reduction level for city, meaning city organization water usage. And the staff has worked diligently, and I can report that we have, in fact, achieved a 20% reduction in large measure because of the work done by our parks contractors and our public works folks to make improvements to our irrigation systems throughout the city. Just because we've reached 20% doesn't mean we're going to stop trying to do even better, but I thought you would be pleased, since last time a couple months ago when we reported on this, we had not been able to achieve 20%. The city's new electronic billboard on Highway 101 is up and running, and the city has had the opportunity to have several city advertisements run on it for Art and Wine, Shape San Carlos, which we're going to hear more about shortly, and encouraging people in San Carlos to help save water because of the significant drought that we're in here in California. The Crestview Park project is underway and starting to near completion. The Transit Village project has had its first public hearing in front of the Planning Commission and has another one scheduled for November the 3rd. And a project, a 20-unit condominium project at 777 Walnut Street has been approved with conditions by the Planning Commission. And finally, last but not least, special thanks to IT, Public Works, and all of those that were involved in the renovation of our new beautiful council chambers.
Thank you, Jeff. That brings us to item 7. So we have a presentation this evening, 7A, presentation on community engagement online solutions, Peak Democracy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to introduce Mike Alvarez Cohen, who is a co-founder of the world's first online public engagement service for government agencies. Mike is a recognized industry leader in the field. In 2007, he and Robert Vogel started Peak Democracy in Berkeley, California, where they successfully broadened civic engagement beyond a small group of vocal residents that did not always represent the views of many other citizens. I don't know if that sounds familiar to anybody, but it kind of does to me on occasion. After their success in Berkeley, Robert and Mike grew Peak Democracy to provide its online public engagement services to cities, counties, and regional agencies across the U.S. and Canada. Their team is growing fast and has provided services to more than 100 government agencies, and quite frankly, very much impressed us when we went out to look for adding this tool to our arsenal as we engage the public here in San Carlos. Mike?
Welcome, Mike.
Jeff, thanks for that excellent introduction. For my approximately 10-minute presentation, I'll start with just a 1-minute overview of the company, just to augment a few things that Jeff said. But I'm going to spend most of the time showing you demos of how other cities are using our service, starting with San Carlos, and then I'll leave enough time for any Q&A if you'd like. So the company's vision is that online civic engagement will become pervasive across all government agencies, and it's just a matter of time. Whether that's 2 years or 10 or 20 years from now, it's hard to say. And the reason why we feel that vision is solid is because we're finding that online civic engagement is dramatically improving the quality of government interaction with their community. That's if it's done right. And that's our mission, to do it right. Our mission is online civic engagement that increases public trust in government. And that can be contrasted with a growing number of crowdsourcing and what some people are calling clicktivism tools, which are more optimized for activists and can actually erode public trust in government. If you go to our website here, let's see if I can bring it up. You can see that we've powered now over 1,700 of these online forums that have attracted over 225,000 online attendees. And as Jeff said in the intro, we're working with well over 100 government agencies, including over 25 government agencies in the San Francisco Bay Area. All right, let me move to the demos now. Let's start with San Carlos. You got a very nice website here. And let's see, refresh the screen. And there on the front here is Shape San Carlos. And so if I click on that, and you can read through an introduction here, and let me just go right to the website. So San Carlos has started to launch several topics, one on drought, one on block parties, and a recent one on automated license plate readers. So you can see that it's already tracked over 90 visitors and over 25 responses. If I click on, go to the topic, you can read a nice introduction. And then you can, over here, you can use these tabs to see, for example, how many people are listening. And so far, if this was a public hearing, those 25 responses at about a minute, 2 to 3 minutes per response is equivalent to over 1 hour of a public hearing. And then I can go to the feedback. And this topic was organized as a survey. So you can see here individual survey responses. I can go through, click through individual survey responses, or we can use it's called the Insight dashboard to look at, for example, a summary of all the feedback to date, and you can see that it's trending yes pretty highly on some of these questions, and also you can read individual responses to some of the survey questions here. Also on the Insight dashboard, we can look at your city by different types of maps and look at the response by areas of San Carlos. We can also look at it by demographics, and certain topics are very conducive to demographic analysis by age group or gender and other variables. So that's one way to use the tool. Let me just quickly show you some other examples just to show you the huge breadth and depth. Let's go to, I have some other cities teed up here. Let's go to Morgan Hill. This is an example of the 20% of our clients that use our service for land use issues. So Morgan Hill is doing a general plan update. And you can see some of the topics here. One of them is a growth strategy. And if I go to that topic, you can see the introductions are a great way not only to get feedback, but to educate the community on these topics. And so, for example, these are different growth strategies that Morgan Hill is considering. And then if I go to post my suggestion, in addition to writing something, right here, I can write something, or posting a photo or a video. I can also go to this map, and this is called a place types map. So now we can look at Morgan Hill and say, for example, you can put whatever categories you want up here, but say I wanted residential infill. I think that should be over here and over here. I think that a neighborhood center should be over here. Actually, I'm going to move that to the other side of the highway and move this over. So now you can do what often is done in workshops and charrettes. You can do it all online, and then you can see people's overall, let me leave that page here, individual area plans or overall area plans. So using the Insight bar here. So, and of course, you can look at it by maps and demographics and other tools. Another popular use of our platform is for budgeting and finance, either fiscal budgeting and finance or project-based finance. And so one example locally is El Cerrito. So if I go to open El Cerrito here, and this is their current topic, but if I go to closed topics, they structured the 2014 budget priorities here. And if I go to that topic here, they've configured this to be so that people can give their priorities for this budget. So for example, this person in precinct ELC 113, here's their priorities, and here's their comment, and you can see, you can scroll down and look at everyone else's priorities and their comments, and you can look at the overall, the priorities average across all the users and on different maps. This is El Cerrito by certain neighborhoods here, precincts, and so forth. And then finally, let me show you one last example. By the way, Fremont's doing a topic on cameras as well for their police department. They've so far attracted quite a few, over 300 people responding to that survey. But I thought I'd just end by going down the street to Menlo Park. Here's their website. They have something called Speak Up Menlo Park. And they're doing this, there's some of their topics. One of them is on a housing element here. And they're using a configuration we call a priority list configuration. So, for example, in this case, I can post a comment, a photo or video, but also I take these priorities that the city offer. I can drag and drop them up and down and show what my priorities are for this particular topic. And then you can look at the feedback based on individual priorities. See down here, individuals. Here's this person's priorities, average priorities, and then across the maps. In this case, they organized, for example, Menlo Park by what's called a next door neighborhood. So just another way you can slice and dice your city if you want. So let me pause right there and see if there's any question or comments about the service.
Thank you, Mike. Questions? Ron?
Thank you. Very interesting presentation, although my eyes glazed over because you some of those things went very
I was
very
moving
quickly.
fast to give you an overview.
No, I understand, and I've been playing with it myself. I guess the first question I would have is, what community has? It's really sort of a two-part question, and the first part would be, what communities have been using this the longest, and can you think of any particular success stories that have come out of the usage of this Peak Democracy program?
Well, some of our oldest communities include Palo Alto. Started using it. Jim Keen was one of our first customers, and we actually prototyped the service in Palo Alto and Berkeley. And another one of our longtime customers is Salt Lake City. They've been using this service for over 5 years across all of their city departments. Here you can see it up on the screen now. They call it Open City Hall. And they've won numerous awards for government outreach and transparency. And I can show you, here's some of their hot topics right now, including some pet topics and utility boxes, golfing, and so forth. And you can see all the topics here, and if I go to the closed topics. Actually, and so that actually brings up some examples of success. So, so here, I can just go through a list. You can see the numerous topics, well over 100 topics across, again, all of their departments. One way to point out success, at least early success, is if I go back to San Carlos, and you can see I'm logged in here, and since I'm a special user, I can this admin mode button appears, and I can turn on your admin mode right here, and then I can go to reports, and we can see, for example, cumulative visitors, daily visitors, but we also can see satisfaction survey results from the residents of San Carlos. And so you can see what some of the people are saying. First of all, there's all these yeses. It's easy to use. This person says, I'm 40-something with kids. It's not realistic for me to go to City Hall to attend meetings. Hooray for the 21st century civic engagement. So you can see people generally like the service, and it's just a great way to augment and diversify the people who can give you feedback on topics across the city government.
Bob?
So is there an instruction manual that comes with this?
Are you implying that it's complex?
Well, for some of us, it's complex. I guess a better question would be, is this more of a staff, Mr. Maltby, situation that you're going to be reading all these lines, or that all of us are going to read the 400 responses to the dog park?
You know, one of the things that we really liked about the Peak Democracy system was that it came with a lot of behind-the-scenes support from Peak Democracy, as well as a lot of nice summary reporting tools, so that we could provide the council, as part of our staff reports on relevant items, the feedback from the system, so that you're not having to go in and track it as council members. We're doing that as staff members. As a council, if there's anything ever that the five of you feel we need to have up there, you just let us know and we'll put something up there. In the meantime, we'll be using the systems for topics that we feel are appropriate, and there are plenty of topics coming up, and I think we can all imagine a few in just the recent past where it would have been very nice to have had this system in place to be able to hear from the public.
Don't get me wrong. I mean, there's a lot of information that if I had the time to look at some of this, I'd be happy to do it.
Right.
When I said about instructions, you were going, as Mr. Collins indicated, it's your system. You're flying through this. How would I know as I get on here that it would do all the things that you say it can do?
I was presenting it mostly from the staff perspective to show you the power.
I get the power.
Right, yeah, but I wasn't showing it from a user perspective. My purpose was to give you a quick survey.
I get that, but the question is, as a user, now here I am,
Right.
I tried it on. Okay? Wow, that's nice. So is there some sort of direct, how do I know what it does? How can I know?
Well, it's
or it's basically, like I said, you were showing it from the staff perspective, a user wouldn't necessarily be doing all the things that you flew through doing.
That's correct.
Okay.
So
All right. I
basically,
misunderstood then.
we
Okay.
would set it up,
Got it.
whether it's
Okay.
an item as a survey or it's going to have a map or
Okay.
that kind of thing. So
But
it should be pretty intuitive for
It's
the user.
intuitive for the user, is I guess my question. That's the only question I had. Thank you.
Right. I was also going to show you, this is an example in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. You can see that every topic has these components on the tab, and one of them is the outcome statement. And that's a way for just you to get a summary of the results. And in this case, in Eau Claire, they did an outcome of their budget analysis, and we're told the city manager got a standing ovation because they never saw that kind of insight into their budget. And I can bring that up for you if you'd like.
Cameron.
Thanks, Mike. So Mark and I got a sort of longer presentation on this a few weeks back, and I'm very excited about this tool. I thought one thing that you could talk about was the functionality that allows you to close the loop with the individual, with citizens who put in a comment, ask a question, et cetera, because I think that's a really important part of it.
Right. I agree. And that's one of our best practices to improve public trust in government, closing the loop. So what you can do on your service is you can respond to individual residents either publicly or privately if you'd like. You can also respond with these outcome statements that it can either be 1 or 2 sentence summaries of we got your feedback, where we hear your general concerns and here's the next steps, or you can do an elaborate presentation. But in all those cases, you're basically giving some level of feedback that people have been heard, and that has been somehow synthesized into the decision process.
So if you take the example of the license plate cameras, you said there were 90 plus responses. We're taking action on that tonight. So for a person who put in a comment or answered the survey, can you give us an example of what we would do and how would it reach that individual?
So as an example, what you would do here is in the outcome tab, which is we're still not at the deadline you can see up on the screen, but this would be a few sentences that might summarize the survey results here. So if I go to feedback and look at the summary here, you might even create, by the way, every topic you can do a nice PDF report. You can see the buttons right there, or even a spreadsheet file. And those are nicely formatted summaries of the topic. In fact, some local governments, what they'll do is when the topic closes, they'll create a PDF report and they'll distribute it to the council and to staff. So it's a nice summary for you to see the results. And that can be also printed for the public record.
Sure. But so staff could go in there and say, tonight, thank you for your response. The city council voted X, and the outcome was we decided to do Y. And that will send an email to everyone who responded?
Right, exactly. That's exactly so. Let me just show you an example here to see if I can. So that you build a nice subscriber base. With each new topic, you're attracting new users, and they're invited to subscribe. And then, in addition to that outcome statement appearing on the web page, it gets emailed to the subscribers. So again, closes the loop in a nice way. And it builds that email list so that you can now.
Yeah, I think that's a great piece of functionality, and I think it's good because it allows staff to, in a very efficient way, summarize what happened once, and it goes out to everyone who participated in the process. So I'm excited to see that, because I think one of the things about message boards sometimes is, or just in general contacting elected officials, you have a feeling that you you put something out there and you never hear a response. And here, part of the thing is that the staff will get back to everybody.
Right. You can even structure a topic like a blog where someone on staff is actually monitoring it and responding as if it was a blog. That's one way to configure a topic. Here's, by the way, the simplest outcome statement. This is, thank you for your comments. It will be included in the transmittal package, and the final decision will be made. So that's the bare minimum, but at least it closed the loop in some way.
Right.
Other questions? I had actually a couple of comments and questions. First one for staff. So Jeff, given the fact that we will be talking later this evening about the automated license plate cameras, will staff be presenting some summary of what showed up on Peak Democracy?
Yes, we will.
Good, because I have to admit, as I was listening to Mike's presentation, I flipped over to the website because I thought I would read some of the comments myself, and every time I went there, it crashed. So I don't know if that's a client problem here, but something we ought to look into.
I'm looking at the website live here. It's not crashing. So
That's what I was doing
yeah,
too, and
yeah.
it was crashing on mine. I also think this, I don't know if we've talked about this before, but this is something that, to Bob's point earlier, might make a lot of sense to do some kind of brief training video or explanatory video that could be made available on the website for people to look at about how this works, how we're using it, how one could use it as a citizen to be more engaged. Something to put in your list of things to get videos done on. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. All right. That brings us to item 8, public comment. This is for people who wish to address the council on items that are not on the agenda. If you wish to address the council on items that are on the agenda, the time will be made available at each item for that. Crystal, I don't actually have any cards, so I guess we don't have any. So we will pass on through item 8 to item 9, which is approval of the consent calendar. That is, these are items that the council normally approves en masse without discussion, although staff members, council members, or members of the public could ask to have an item removed and considered separately. I am actually going to ask that we remove and consider separately item 9H. Are there any other items that my colleagues would like to have removed?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like 9K removed.
9K as well. All right. If there are no other requests for removal, then I will entertain a motion on the remaining items.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to approve consent calendar items 9A through G, 9I, and 9J.
Is there a second?
I second.
There's a motion and a second. Crystal, would you call the roll, please?
Yes.
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 Yes. Crystal, is your mic on?
Yeah, I didn't think Jeff's or yours was on, even though the red light's on. It's not hitting. Now it hits. Now it works. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now.
Testing, 1, 2,
But
3.
the previous time that you spoke and the previous, it didn't fly through.
All right. Thank you. We will take those removed items up at the end of new business. So that brings us to item 10, 10A, new business, consideration of authorizing a request for proposal for the purchase and installation of one fixed automated license plate reader, ALPR, and one mobile ALPR to address specific crime problems. Good evening, Chief.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor Olbert, members of the City Council, Greg Rothus, Police Chief. I know you have my staff report in front of you that outlines a request on the part of the Police Department to authorize a request for proposal for 2 license plate readers for the City of San Carlos. I'm going to make a presentation that kind of augments that staff report. And helping me and assisting me with that presentation tonight will be Captain Mike Senna with the Sheriff's Office. Captain Mike is here today. Captain Mike Senna serves as the Executive Director of the Northern California Regional Intelligence Center, or NCRIC. That's an acronym you'll hear a couple times tonight. And it is one of many fusion centers across the country. And essentially what it does is law enforcement pours information into the fusion center. That information is collated, analyzed, and brought back out to law enforcement. It could be related to Homeland Security. It could be related to a series of car thefts or a series of burglaries. But that's one of Mike's role, and he's going to, and one of their responsibilities is to oversee the license plate reader program. So tonight what I'm going to do is go over quickly the ALPR technology itself. How does it work? That'll be the quickest part of the presentation. And then how does law enforcement use the data once we've collected it? When we get to the issue of privacy concerns, which is really in many ways the meat and potatoes of the presentation tonight, I'll turn that over to Captain Mike Senna, who runs the NCRIC and who oversees what is really probably the strictest policies and procedures as it relates to data privacy and data security in the country. I'm going to talk about, then I'll take over the presentation again. I'll talk about why do we need it in San Carlos and why are we specifically asking for it to be at Britton and 101. And bring back Mike up, who has some success stories. Not only he'll go over one in Fremont, but there's some, other success stories with the ALPRs or automated license plate readers throughout the region. In particular is this one with Piedmont, which is a recent example. The ALPR technology, or automated license plate reader technology, is simply a camera that's positioned to read license plates. It converts those license plates into characters, and then those license plates are stored. Once we're doing that, we're able to compare these license plates inside that system against hot lists. It could be stolen vehicle lists, and it could be Amber Alerts, or any other type of a list where we're looking for wanted vehicles, vehicles under investigation, that sort of thing. We're able to take those, once we get those alerts, we're able to alert those law enforcement, and law enforcement is then positioned at times to respond in an investigative manner or in a patrol response to go out and possibly detain that vehicle. At the NCRIC, data is stored for 1 year. Captain Senna will talk about data storage at length, and the data storage across the United States runs from not storing it at all to storing it forever, depending upon where you are in the country, where we recommend data storage of 1 year. In terms of how do we use this technology, this new technology with license plate readers, again, we have these plates in the system where we can use it to locate wanted persons. If we have a person who we know is responsible for a series of robberies, we'll put that person's vehicle plate into the system. When that plate crosses any one of the license plate readers, it sends an alert. There's your wanted person. He was just located at the camera at Britton and 101. So we know the vehicle, we know who we're looking for. We can also do that, we can do that with victims and witnesses, missing persons, in particular with respect to Amber Alerts. At times, there's vehicles maybe wanted in investigations, and we can use that. We can plug those plates in, and we can find out and track where these vehicles are. We can also use these for, they're also used for protection at events and protection of infrastructure. If we're having, for example, a dignitary at an event, there may be a particular person of concern whom we feel is a threat to the dignitary. That plate could be plugged into the system, and if that person enters the event, we know that he's there, and we can go ahead and take protective measures as it relates to that person. There's just a myriad of ways that we can use this technology to support investigations. For example, if we have a plate from a crime scene from San Carlos, we can run that plate to see if it's ever been in similar crime scenes, particular serial crimes, burglaries, and whatnot. Has this plate crossed other license plate readers on or about the time they had a residential burglary, for an example? That's how that tool can be used in a myriad of different ways. I'll have Mike come up now and talk about issues as it relates to privacy, which is really one of the biggest concerns. And what the NCRIC does is spend a lot of their time doing is ensuring the privacy protections of individuals, not only as it relates to this data, but really all data. So, Captain Senna?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. To talk about what we do with privacy and our concerns about it, part of our operation, in order for us to actually establish what we are as a NCRIC, as a fusion center, had to be to establish policies regarding privacy. Otherwise, we couldn't be recognized. When we look at ALPR data, that's always a huge concern. Everyone's concerned about, well, does this mean I'm going to be monitored? Who's following me? What is this all about? And for us, that's why one of the first things we made was a policy saying that you cannot monitor individuals based on anything other than criminal activity, the protection of events, and that if anyone's engaged in First Amendment protected activities, the system cannot be used for that purpose. So as far as the access to the systems, we log every user in, give them their permission to get in the system. It's dual factor authenticated, So that way, even if you couldn't give your password up to somebody and someone accessed the system without an ever-changing personal identification number that only that user has. So that way, we can log what they're doing. The other thing is, we require that they put in a case number. We also require that their lawful purpose, the things that Chief Rothfuss just mentioned, those criminal investigative leads that they're doing, whatever they're working on, there has to be a lawful purpose for that use. As far as auditing the system, we do that on a regular basis. Every month we run a report on who is, what agencies are accessing the system. What cases are they requesting the information for? Are they meeting the criteria for those investigative requirements? And part of that is also to make sure that now we have the ability to track what users are doing as far as the law enforcement side. And this is only for law enforcement investigative needs. No private sector, no public. This information is not public information. It's only for those folks that are trying to solve cases. Our policy of 12 months was derived from the file mechanisms that we use for the Attorney General file guidelines from California, which basically, after a lot of work, determined that, in order for an investigator to have sufficient amount of time to solve their cases, they need at least 12 months. And that way, we give folks 12 months to look at their investigations, whether burglaries are connected, whether armed robberies are connected. Without that type of guidance and rules, people would want to keep things forever. One, it clogs up the system with too much data. Vehicles are transitory. People change ownership all the time. We want to make sure that we have fresh information that's good for cops on the street today. So on that, I'll pass it back over to Captain Rothfuss.
As it relates to the retention policy of the 12 months, as Captain Sena pointed out, when we talk about the system and what its value is, there's really no value to law enforcement. The technology doesn't have any value to us. The camera, the software, and the hardware isn't what's valuable for us. What's valuable for us is the data. And so purging it before it has an adequate time to give us value is spending money and really not getting full use of the system when you purge data early. And so 12 months we feel is fair. Longer than that, it's really not needed that much longer than that, although some agencies will keep it longer than that. So why in San Carlos and where in San Carlos? Here's a map of the Britton Avenue and 101 interchange, and you can see there's REI, there's Best Buy, there's Home Depot, and we know a lot of other stores around that, in and around that area with respect to, there's Home Goods, there's Chipotle, and there's a lot of businesses, and it's very vibrant, and it's getting busier. We've seen our sales taxes come in, and we can tell that this is a very busy, vibrant part of the community. One of the unique aspects to that is we've had a series of crimes, which I'll show you shortly, in that area, and they're picking up. We're talking about robbery, burglary, and thefts from vehicles. And they're picking up in that area, and it keeps us very busy down there. I think it doesn't take a criminologist to know that if you're going to commit a crime in that area, how are you going to get out of there? And that off-ramp or that on-ramp into southbound 101 is a good, quick way to commit a crime and get out of town very quickly. So putting a camera there, in my opinion, it's not 100% sure that the suspects who commit a crime there are going to go buy that camera, but I think it's a pretty good odds that they will. And so we've thought that that'd be a good location for one camera. In terms of robberies, you can see those here in San Carlos. This is a 2-year trend on robberies. You see there's a couple at Best Buy, one was involving a handgun. A couple of victims in those robberies, one I believe at Home Depot, one at Best Buy, were injured during the commissions of those robberies. These are burglaries in that area where you see the kind of suitcase-looking thing. There's multiple cases in there, and you can see one says 7, 5, and 2. There's that many burglaries in that particular area over a 2-year period in our industrial area. And here what we have is the thefts from vehicles. And again, a lot of the bunched up cases you can see, for example, 24-Hour Fitness, where we're having 22 reported, Best Buy 10, REI 27 at REI. You really feel the suspects at the REI thefts are most likely going to be jumping on the freeway to get out of there right there. We're also obviously requesting the use, another camera, of the mobile license plate readers that we can place in a patrol car. And that patrol car can then be used on patrol. The license plate reader can be turned on. We could use that right after a crime scene. We can roll through a crime scene to start recording license plates to see if any of them may have been involved. During patrol, when that license plate reader is on, if it's doing patrol in the White Oaks area, we end up having a burglary on Park Avenue. If that car went by Park Avenue or anywhere around Park Avenue that day, we may be able to see what plates were in and around Park Avenue when that burglary occurred, and that might be a pointer system for us. So that's the other request, in addition to the fixed camera. There have been some success stories and good success stories with respect to the ALPRs, and Captain Senna now will come up and talk about a recent case in the city of Piedmont who put a pretty extensive system around their community.
Thank you, Chief. Now, the deployment on Piedmont was a little bit atypical for what we've seen. They put 37 cameras up around the entire city. We don't see that too often, but one of the interesting things was looking at the effects after about 8 months of that use. And when you look at the 88% decrease in robberies, the 59% decrease in burglaries, and 28% decrease in reportable crimes, they also had 35% reduction in crime overall in the entire city. Now, it's not just the technology, because, you know, part of it is the use of the technology by the people. Officers being responsive. If you put a fixed reader out on location and you don't have officers out there to contact individuals, then you will not get that stolen car, and we've seen that in the past. So it has to be that dedication from your dispatchers, from officers on the street to respond to those vehicles. Now, they've had some great results on that, over $90,000 in recovery of vehicles from the 15 cars that they recovered. But the other piece of this is that when their investigators from the Piedmont Police Department, their detectives are going out and talking to people in jails, they're saying they're not going to Piedmont because they have this technology and that they know that it will capture them. And you often say, well, they can just, you know, take the plate off or replace it with another plate. Well, oftentimes that's still a stolen plate. It will alert the system. If they put paper plates on the vehicle, that's one of the first things that officers see. If it doesn't look right to them and there's no plate on a car, then there's a reason for them to contact the folks in the vehicle, and it has that same effect. It deters them from committing crime within their city. And that's what they're seeing in most part, at least in the judgment of the chief of the Piedmont Police Department, is that this technology is making a huge impact. Now, by putting one reader out here in San Carlos, will it make this type of a difference that Piedmont is seeing? Most likely not. But it will make a difference in the fact that as they're using the system, they're able to find those individuals that are engaged in crime, not just in the city of Piedmont, but cities throughout the Bay Area. That's where that technology and being able to co-locate the information becomes most valuable, because as you're looking at the crimes that are happening in your city, it's not like the trash man that only shows up one day a week in your city and they don't work the rest of the week. They're collecting trash and actually burglarizing houses throughout the Bay Area. So being able to connect those pieces to help investigators. And one of the amazing things for them was that, you know, of the 6 investigative leads that they had based on this, 3 of them were armed robberies that they were able to solve, because at least now they had a point to look at. In one case, it was a partial plate. That's the other strength of the system, is that it gives you the ability to search for partial plates and be able to find the matching vehicle. And they did that within 30 minutes in one case to find the armed robber that had come in 5 minutes before the armed robbery and left the city 5 minutes after the armed robbery. It was one of those clues that investigators need. But without the technology, it would be unsolved. And that robber would still be out there, you know, basically pointing a gun in people's faces today. So that's kind of the success that they've had. As I said, atypical as far as their deployment of the system, but it does show the value of the technology in identifying those folks that are engaged in criminal activity. Thank you.
I think that concludes our presentation, and we're ready to take any questions.
Thank you, Greg. Questions? Bob?
Piedmont put 35 or 37.
37, sir.
They must have got a deal on it. Did they spend $1 million too? I did the quick math.
A little over $600,000.
So they got a deal, but they still spent $600,000. Okay.
$600,000.
Well,
Yes,
they're
sir.
certainly safe. Chief, if you could explain to me, and again, I sort of understand. Let's assume that someone goes into Best Buy and steals something and they take off, okay? But no one sees the car and no one sees the license plate. How does this reader help you?
In many ways, a few ways. First of all, for example, if that were to happen and we were to know that there was a theft from REI during a 12-hour time frame,
Okay.
it becomes a needle in a haystack.
Right.
It's not that great. Unless, of course, there are other REIs who have been experiencing robberies or burglaries out of their store, and they've got a partial plate description of one AXQ, and that's all they know. We're able to then see if one AXQ ran through that license plate
Right.
reader during that 12-hour period.
But it's, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And then the second would be in a more compressed time frame. The guy just left. I just saw him. He just stole, he just stole a bunch of stuff and he got in his car.
Sure.
Well, then maybe we'll have, I don't know, maybe like 30 cars cross that reader at that time, and we can look through 30 cars. But we're not going to look through 1,200 cars.
But let's say you look through 30 cars, and that's obviously the benefit to this if it's shorter time, but they still didn't get a plate. There's 30 cars. How do you, if none of those plates are in your system, do you check it to DMV? But then you've got 30 names. Could be Joe Smith, Mary Jones. How do you know those are good or bad? Or is there a database that you can say, oh, Jim Smith, he, has some other issues or something, and you can track it back? Or
Captain?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
as far as the analyst, and that's kind of the work that we do in the center, looking at those criminal activities, it would be looking at the short time frame, what are the vehicles that are there, and then if it's a small group of folks, screening them through the lowest level denominator of systems to find out are they engaged or have they ever been engaged in this type of criminal activity.
So you have a database then, is my point, is if you get a 30-minute time frame, you got 30 cars, you've got ABC 123, that's the license plate. You can put that through your system. Oh, you don't have that, but you can get the name of the person, James Smith or something.
Absolutely.
And then you can run that name through another database?
Absolutely. And it's a series of databases that they have to look through with the right restrictions and permissions.
Right,
But we
understand.
do have that access.
Because that's the thing that was throwing me off.
Right,
I mean,
yeah.
if you get the plate, I get it. I can understand that. You can run that, and you've got the thing all set. But if you don't have the plate, then and hopefully, like you said, the key is to have it in a, as you said, Captain Roth, it's in a short period of time, not 12 hours to be like forever, needle in haystacks.
Absolutely. And some of those folks may not be engaged in or associated with the criminal activity.
Of course.
But they could be witnesses. So
I understand. Okay, thank
And
you.
you can see the crime type, the theft of a $20 item for REI
Sure.
is going to get X amount of analyst work. A homicide
I
in the
understand.
Marine West parking lot is going to
Sure.
get Y
Of
amount.
course,
So
of course. It looks like from the 27 at REI that somebody should just stand there and watch the cars because they keep breaking in at 27. What was that, 27 over a quarter or over a 3?
27 reported
Over a
a 2-year period,
2-year period,
just
yeah.
in the REI
So
parking
basically
lot.
one a month, they're at least grabbing them. Okay. Those are the questions. Thank you.
Other questions? Matt?
Yeah, to follow Mr. Russilli's scenario, now you get some plates and some of them are stolen or the vehicle is stolen. Now you're trying to attach a vehicle to a guy who doesn't even own it.
Right.
Explain that.
Well, there's a couple things that can happen. First of all, if we do get a stolen vehicle coming out during that time frame, we're going to see that there's a good possibility that that vehicle is associated with that crime. Another thing that the analysts are going to do is to see if that vehicle has ever crossed another license plate reader during a particular time frame, and where has that happened. Obviously, we can be putting BLLs or be on the lookouts for that vehicle in other locations. There's a lot of ways that we can follow up on leads on that.
Actually, I can follow up on that also if you'd like. As far as if it's a known stolen vehicle, the moment it crosses the threshold and that picture is taken, it takes about 2 seconds for it to process through the hot lists that are in the background of the system. And that immediately goes out to the dispatch agency. And if there are officers in the field, it can go directly to them as well. So that way they have that alert immediately and can make contact with it. The other piece on that is if it is in a mobile reader, the person in the car, an alert goes off in the vehicle, the screen flashes red and says this is a potentially stolen vehicle, must be confirmed by you through your dispatch to make sure that it is the correct plate that it's read, because there is an error rate between zeros and O's that look the same in a license plate. So it always has to be confirmed, but they can get that in the car immediately, and then they have to call dispatch to confirm that's the right plate to take action.
But to get to your question, I think what you're saying is the system is not going to be 100% perfect. A stolen vehicle will cross a license plate reader, and we may not get to it. But the idea is to have plans and practices in place so that we can get to the vast majority of them. We'll know which direction it was going, when it crossed. We can alert nearby agencies to look for that vehicle, and there's just a lot that we can do.
We can't see in the vehicle normally. It's not designed to take pictures of people, but it'll give you a physical description of a vehicle that can be sent to officers so they can have a photograph of it.
Just a follow-up question to my own then. If I am planning to go do a robbery at Best Buy and I go out that morning and steal a car to do it, you're not going to know anything.
As soon as it's reported stolen, and they can immediately put it in the system. If it's not known to be stolen, no one reports it. It's like that tree that falls in the woods. We're not going to know it's stolen until someone says something.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions. Thank you for the information on the other cities, although I'm curious about Piedmont. Is Piedmont demographically like San Carlos? I mean, they're a rather small town, are they not?
They're small. They're smaller than us.
Okay. So, I mean, if there was an 88% decrease in robberies, what does that mean? Were there like 20 robberies and there are now 2?
Actually, there were 8 robberies, same time frame, same time period, in one quarter. So 8 armed robberies in their city. They are surrounded by Oakland, so there's a lot of transitory nature of folks that come through the city. But went from 8 robberies to 1 robbery. It is a 1.65 square mile city with 10,000 population, so it's really a small microcosm of what you'd see in larger cities.
Right. Okay. The other thing I was wondering about is, I wrote down bypass attempts. Is there ways that people can subvert this system? I mean, there's always hackers and people out there that are always figuring out ways to jam radar systems and get around security systems and computers and that sort of thing. Has this been around long enough to find out whether or not that type of thing is occurring, and how are you combating it?
Absolutely. Well, the technology has been in use for about 12 years. It's actually over 20 years that the technology has been out there, but over 12 years it's been actually pushed out more and more through law enforcement. As far as hacking the system, with the right protections that we have a whole cyber team that we've developed to protect our networks and our systems. We haven't seen people that have had the ability to hack in. Of course, there's nothing 100% secure, but we try to make it the most secure system that we can. As far as the system itself, it's optical character recognition. It has 2 lenses, one that takes a normal vision picture of the system and one that takes an infrared picture. So at nighttime with no visibility at all, it'll still capture the image itself. So you have those 2 images to look at. Now, there are folks that can try to alter their plates or things like that, but a keen officer, well, that's the first thing they'll notice is someone either covering their plate, trying to alter numbers, things like that. So those are the ways that it can be defeated. But it's the trained officer that then, rather than a sea of plates that look normal to them, see the anomaly.
Is there a sign that says you are entering a city with an automatic license plate reader?
There are none. The technology itself, the purpose of it is to find bad guys. Mm-hmm. So we don't advertise to, normally we do not advertise to the bad guys, we're looking for you. Although the word has got out about Piedmont system, obviously. Right. And every crook out there knows not to go there with a stolen car, but we still have some that do because they're not that bright.
Well, I was just thinking of the analogy of, I think there was a report one time that said that even if you don't have a home alarm system, if you just stick the sign out in front, people are less likely to burglarize a home. That's why I brought up the question about sticking a sign out there.
Oh, absolutely. That you're entering an ALPR zone city or something like that. Yeah.
The other question I have, I don't know if you answered it with Matt. I was busy looking at other things and trying to figure out my questions. The real-time feedback. If a car's, you said something about a car being stolen. And all of a sudden the license plate reader picks it up in a different city. Mm-hmm. That gets instantly transmitted to the police in that city or patrol cars in that city. Is that how it works, or does it go to all patrol cars?
Right now the system is set up. We have some agencies where it goes to their dispatch centers. There are some agencies that are smaller that aren't part of our larger program, but they may pass an ALPR. There may be an ALPR driving through their city. When the alert comes to us, we notify the agency from our center. Although our preferred preference is it goes directly to that agency if they are willing to take that data immediately. But there are false positives, so someone has to review the data itself. But our goal is to make sure it's real time. When the vehicle is stolen, as soon as a person takes the report, it can be entered into the system directly through us. So that way any reader it hits at that moment, it will alarm on. And we actually had my deputy director's daughter, vehicle was stolen. And she called up and said, Dad, can you help? He goes, no, you got to go get a police report because you've got to have a local agency that's working on this. Police report, officer went in, took the report, submitted the request, and the vehicle was returned in 30 minutes from that point of the officer taking the report.
I just had a couple more, and I think, so if I know that this is going on and I'm intending on committing a crime somewhere, it seems to me that putting one at Britain and Industrial or the Britain Avenue off-ramp isn't going to be enough. You're going to want to put one at Holly, you're going to want to put one at Whipple.
You know, the council is
You're
going
going
to
to put
have
one at El Camino.
Right. The council is going to have some options. Obviously, they can either decide no license plate readers, or they could add to that, or they can ask me to come back with a report to say what that would be. But you're right. I mean, the more we put in place, the better it would be, and the better net we would have. But what this offers is our opportunity, in a sense, for a community to kind of put our toe in the water with this technology, to see if it's working for us, to get a chance of a comfort level with the council that this is working for us, that the data is being stored for a year and dumped after a year, and that it's being managed properly. And the other aspect of this is that the nature of that location is such that I believe that that the probability is high that a criminal, somebody who commits a crime in that general area, is likely to take that on-ramp and may even come in through that way. And so that's kind of what makes it a good investment at that particular location. But yes, I mean, if we wanted to net the Industrial, we would want to put one on south side of Industrial, north side of Industrial, and maybe Britain and Howard, and that's pretty much all the ways in and out of there. And we could have that place geofenced in the industrial area.
Okay. And then maybe this is a question of staff. If we approve this, how long are we authorizing this for? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? Is it indefinite? Can we, pardon me?
You're buying the thing.
You're buying it.
That's correct. Right now, this is just policy direction in general. How do you feel about it? We're going to issue an RFP that it would result in a contract that we'd bring back where you'd actually make the purchase. But if you're not interested conceptually in a license plate reader or license plate readers in town, then we won't bother with the RFP.
Right. Last question, is Oakland using this?
They are. In fact, they just expanded their network. I think they're going up to 23 cars in the city.
All right, thank you.
Cameron.
Thanks, Greg. Why are we buying this as opposed to the county? And is this, how does the sheriff's office have this equipment, particularly the mobile reader? You know, we don't own the squad cars, for instance. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, in terms of the contract cities, Portola Valley is looking at this as well. Other communities may look at this as well. The sheriff's office in the county is not in a position to finance each and every jurisdiction's or every street's license plate readers. It's a policy decision for the council. It's a value decision for the council. It's a trade-off decision for the council. And it's our opinion, it's most appropriate that the city make that decision and make that outlay.
Okay. But the county, is the county sheriff's office making the recommendation that this would be a good tool for the city? Okay. And is the county sheriff's office doing that in other communities where they serve?
Yes.
Okay. But specific with this type of equipment, this specific tool, you're asking each individual community to purchase it itself and then essentially make it available to the county sheriff's office to...
We haven't got this far with Portola Valley yet. We're only conceptually with them, but I believe that that's going to be, you know, the take on that they would go ahead and make that purchase themselves.
Okay. Are there other similar pieces of law enforcement equipment that the city is buying and then making available to the sheriff's office?
The only thing I can recall in the past is when we had red light cameras when the sheriff's office took over.
Okay.
Those were the city's cameras. The city purchased those. They continued to maintain those until we were done with them. Okay. But that's the only piece of equipment. You know, the sheriff's office has bought, clearly has a lot of equipment, made a lot of investments, you know, here in San Carlos. But in this particular piece of technology, we believe that it's really the city's investment, the city's decision, and decide to invest in law enforcement. Very much like if we asked if and we have done this, would you like another motor deputy? And the city said, yes, we would like another motor deputy, and we will fund it. And so, would you like these cameras, ALPRs? And if the answer is yes, then the city funds it.
And the mobile unit is going to be exclusively used in the city of San Carlos, or the sheriff's office can move it to?
Exclusively used in the city of San Carlos. That's what will be in a San Carlos patrol vehicle. Because we're a mutual aid type of agency, if for some reason we had something go down in unincorporated Redwood City, we could certainly shoot the camera there. We trade assets back and forth with our different areas, but that would be mounted in a San Carlos patrol vehicle, would be used on patrol in San Carlos and not anywhere else. Absent a kind of, we kind of scratch your back, I scratch your back in that or so.
Okay, thanks.
With the neighboring areas.
Thanks, guys. Few questions here. Does Piedmont put its data into NCRIC?
They do.
They do. Okay. This actually, next one, maybe a question more for Greg Rubens. If the data that our license plate readers supplied and was placed in the NCRIC database was somehow the subject of a personal lawsuit, there had been something inappropriate done with the data. Who is? Are we? I shouldn't say who is responsible. Are we indemnified against something like that if the transgression or violation of protocol had occurred at NCRIC, not on our turf, basically?
I would say that the contract that would be prepared as a result of this would have a provision like that in it. I would definitely be interested in reviewing that and making sure that it's included in any contract we have.
Okay.
And actually, all of our MOUs include the indemnification clause for agencies and the use of data.
Okay. Why a retention policy of 1 year? I mean, and just to put a little context on that, I mean, I know for a fact that investigations start a lot faster than 1 year, and I presume that basically an active investigation, you would retain the data however long you needed to pursue the investigation. So why a year shot clock?
The reason 12 months was based on more complex organized crime activities or serial criminal events that may take a long span of time to actually figure out that something's occurred. If you're looking at, child molestation or something like that, and we have had those cases where we're looking at individuals that have, been victimized, it takes them some time to come forward. Having that length of time to figure out, one, was that vehicle near the potential, crime scene? That's why we look at a 12-month period to pull together not just what's happening in your community, but what's happening throughout the region for that type of criminal behavior. So it gives them that 12-month time frame to figure those things out.
I understand that, although referring back to the chief's presentation, I mean, and I know, unfortunately, we have all sorts of different crimes that occur in San Carlos, but the data you were showing us actually were not those kind of crimes. They were not organized crime type things. They were not the kind of things that take a long time to mature before somebody reports them. So I guess I question, in our particular case, if the primary purpose of doing this is to cut down on burglaries and robberies, what would be a more realistic shot clock? Obviously shorter than a year.
I was actually going to say that one of the bigger values to the system is being able to solve that one homicide or that one rape investigation. And that's kind of the bigger strength of the system. Dealing with the burglaries and dealing with the armed robberies is critical too, but we're looking at those more serious crimes that are harder to investigate without that data. And that's why we went with the 12-month period. And that was based upon the research that the Attorney General's office did in developing their guidance on the retention of files and records to give folks that those investigators on those harder crimes that time frame. And if there is identification that an individual or that larger homicide or whatever the investigation may be, once it's identified, we can actually store that data for 5 years separately.
But meanwhile, we store the data on every single car that passes through the Britton Avenue entrance on the freeway for a year, even though the vast majority of them have nothing to do with a crime whatsoever. That's a rhetorical comment, so you don't need to respond to it. It seems to me that in terms of the data warehousing function and the utility of the data, we could enroll in NCRIC essentially or not. What do we lose if we don't subscribe to the services provided with NCRIC? In other words, that we maintain the data ourselves for our own investigations.
Part of the issue is that it will give you a hot list of stolen vehicles, but you won't have the list of investigative vehicles. And rather than be able to update those instantaneously throughout the entire region, you'd have to wait for an upload from DOJ. They do usually update it within 24 hours, but you have a 24-hour window where you wouldn't have the knowledge that a vehicle is stolen. The other part of that is the investigative leads and records. It doesn't have that data in there as well. So if you're an investigator and you put the data into our system, we're looking for those vehicles for those, long-range investigations that you're doing, those heinous crimes. It wouldn't have that data in there as well. So it would be ultimately you'd have to, if you knew that a guy might be driving through San Carlos, you'd have to call the police department, ask them, could you run a record? And you'd have to do that on a regular basis to get that information from them. It's not the most effective way to do it. It's kind of like going back to a telephone book rather than going to Google and doing the search through there.
And if I can add too, it really one of the other things about it is it's very similar to the concept of mutual aid and fire. It's kind of like we have these assets, we share, we go back and forth. Part of the concept would be to be a regional player as it relates to ALPR technology. If we want to be able to use data collected from other cities and other communities in investigation of our crimes, then we would maybe want to consider being a player and having them have access to our data as well.
Yeah, and you'd lose visibility on what's happening at neighboring cities that have the same technology. You wouldn't be able to run those geographical searches to find out those similar crimes that have happened in other places to see if the same vehicle has been in those spots.
And want to go back to addressing the database question, Kevin. If we're going to set up our own database for our own system, we have to have our own staff set up our own database, bring in our own rules, develop our own policies, have our own audits, all the things that the NCRIC in San Francisco is done a yeoman's job doing. And so we would have to set up a separate shop to do the same thing that they do.
Is NCRIC's structure such that an individual participant could say, yeah, I like all your services, I like all that, but I want my data dumped after 90 days?
We can adjust it to whatever the agency wants. We just can't extend it beyond 12 months based on our policy.
Beyond 12 months, but you can go less. Okay, and then last question for now from me. Who actually owns the data at NCRIC? Once our readers generate it, we put it into yours, but there's sort of, who owns it? Is it your data at that point, or is it still ours?
It's still the law enforcement agency that contributes it. It's their data.
Which would be the sheriff's office in our case. So the county basically would own it. I guess I'll phrase this as a hypothetical question, but I mean it seriously, and Greg Rubens, you may want to chime in on this as well. So I'm imagining a situation where something has happened on the civil liberties side where we're like, wait a minute, we want to dump the data that's in there, okay? Don't know what that is. And so we contact NCRIC and say, it's our data, get rid of it. Does the county call it? Can the county call up and say, wait a minute, that's not actually theirs, that's ours, because it came in under the sheriff's office?
Well, I think it's a similar question to the last one. Is it's going to be determined by the contracts that we have? I think we probably would want to, since it's our equipment, I think we'd want to have control over the data that it gathers, and that makes sense to me. But it might require looking at our contract with the sheriff to make sure that they line up together, because this would be a new service that they're providing to us.
Okay.
I'd like to just address the question you talked about, why 1 year, and Captain Senna talked about the reasons why that the NCRIC felt that was a good length of time to have it. But there's another side of that coin too, with respect to 1 year. There are many agencies that hold data for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and longer. And there are stories and records of those data retentions resulting in arrests and case closures because somebody was able to hold that data for that long of time. So I'd also like to add that there is a recognition by the NCRIC that holding data for too long of a period of time does create privacy concerns. And the NCRIC doesn't really want to hold data longer than there is an apparent business need to hold it. Would it benefit us to hold it for 2, 3, and 5 years? It would. But there is an acknowledgement of privacy concerns and is an acknowledgement that this data should be purged and that its investigative value is really fresh and best in a 12-month period. Also, I'd like to remind Council that that the technology is of no value to the city. The camera doesn't mean anything to you. The the hardware, the software. It is the data. That's the value. And it is for what we believe, good reasons, that 1 year is the retention policy.
Of course, it reminds me of the joke about somebody who said they lost the backup to their computer from 3 years ago, and their friend said, "That's okay, just call up the NSA." Bob, and then Ron.
Chief, I probably missed it along the way. I understand the Britain and 101 camera. The car, in the car, driving down Park Avenue, it's in the car.
It's in the car.
It's going to, every car that passes it or every car that it's parked, it could pick up.
Yes.
But the burglary happened on Orange. Okay, missed it. In other words, I'm looking at sort of a statistical situation where, boy, what are the odds? I mean, that the car that has the camera on it, if they all had them, but even so, it's going to be as beneficial. I can sort of see I can sort of see the beneficial one when it's stationed there at 101, but the car one escapes me. That's just like, that would be a needle in a haystack.
Well, let me give you an example where it might work. For example, the Redwood City Police discovers that they have a car crew that's doing burglaries in Redwood City, and they know a partial plate on that car. They may know the whole plate. 2 days later, our deputies go out in the street, and about 5 o'clock, when it usually happens, we start getting calls. We've had 3 residential and burglaries in San Carlos. We know there's a crew running in Redwood City. Now we know the plate, or at least the partial plate. We can see if our patrol car, if that plate ever crossed our patrol car, where it crossed our patrol car, and what time it crossed our patrol car. And now we have a place to start. That's just one example of how that can be of value.
And again, it all boils down to the plate. I mean, you've got to have a plate or a partial plate. Otherwise, this technology is just...
It's all about plates.
Yeah, I mean, and it's harder for me to put my hand around the... Well, again, not really, I guess. It would... Let's say the car is driving down the street on Park, and it picks up a plate. Does it automatically hit a button? Does that ring a bell, right? Because it's in the system. It automatically, the police officer knows that it's right there. It doesn't have to go back in 20 minutes later, or a half hour, an hour or two later.
You mean if that plate is stolen? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, or stolen. Let's say it's in that burglary. It's the burglary one, and he goes by and he catches.
Okay.
Does it tell him right away? Does the buzzer go off?
Yeah, that's right away. You hit an alert. You've just crossed a vehicle subject to investigations for residential burglary. This is the plate. And the second thing that has to happen is there's this confirmation that needs to take place, because it's not perfect. You know, it's running 90-95%, but sometimes there might be a misplaced character due to the OCR being.
No, I understand that.
So they run into this process of confirming it, and then they do all the things that they do to set up on it.
But there is an instant hit, so to speak. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Ron.
Okay, yeah, I just had a couple others, but I thought of something based on what Bob said, is that, all right, you find a car that, or keeps showing up in these areas. I mean, don't you have to have, is that then probable cause to pull them over?
No, car showing up. My car shows up in my area all the time. It's just, so it's nothing. That doesn't mean anything. And I think that's the thing that concerns people. Those things mean nothing to us. A car showing up all the time. A car that's a subject vehicle of an investigation for residential burglary on the peninsula, or a partial plate or something like that, that will definitely trigger something. But just the fact that a car happens to be somewhere all the time, it doesn't mean anything to the system.
Yeah, the only instance where it has a reference is if it's near the vicinity of a crime. And if it's near the same type of crime at multiple locations throughout the Bay Area, then that becomes a lead for an investigator.
Okay, so then that becomes probable cause,
Correct.
you're saying. And
that system, I understand, can be searched to do that. And that's where its value is, too, is we have residential burglaries. They have them in Redwood City. We have them, and the analysts are able to see, are there common plates in these areas? And the system can check, are there common plates, and what are those plates? And begin to see, hey, you know what, maybe these are connected. And so there's just a lot that system can do.
And then one of my other questions was, I thought about this as we were going through these questions, was that in the cities where this has been done, have you found any instances of sort of a it's like when you try to stop a leak one place, it goes somewhere else. In other words, you reduce crime in one city, but the criminals have found out that they've got the automatic license plate reader, so maybe they start targeting the neighboring city. Have you seen any evidence of that so far?
Statistically, no. Anecdotally, from criminals who are talking to investigators, since they're not going to those cities that have the systems, They're obviously going to other places because that's what they do for a living. It's an odd living, but that's what they do.
So, I mean, if every other city but us did it, I mean, could we then be in a situation where they know we're the only one left that doesn't have it?
I think an extreme example, yeah. I mean, if Redwood City
And
and
it
Belmont
is
got
an
netted,
extreme example.
yeah, then yes. But there's also that percentage of crooks that they don't know.
They just don't pay attention.
They don't pay. They don't read the paper. They don't.
Right.
They're busy getting ready to steal in the morning.
So I promise this is my last question. In our staff report, it mentioned that you...
I'll hold you to that.
I shouldn't have said that. In the staff report, it said that you sought input from the ACLU, but I don't, if it was there, I missed it. Did the ACLU, or has the ACLU published some sort of an opinion on this? Is there sort of an official statement that they've made?
There is, and they did come out with a document titled "The State of Surveillance." I believe it was last year and a half ago, talking about license plate readers and their use. And of course, their big concerns were about privacy, about monitoring of people doing First Amendment activities, along with the retention of data itself. And the question from them was, well, why do you want to retain this large amount of data on people that may not be engaged in criminal activity? And my response to them is because we can't tell who's driving the car that's committing the criminal activity. But it gives us a point to get us to that vehicle. Now, beyond that, it's up to the investigator to follow up on it. But that was kind of their bigger issue, was the retention of the data. They do consider it a valuable tool, but they consider that without policies, without guidance, it's ripe for abuse. And nationally, only 50% of the agencies in the country that have the technology actually have a policy, which to me is absurd. I'm hoping that changes, but the only way that will change is through good city councils that want to have policies, through good states that want to have good policies, and that's why we're here today.
Thank you.
Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Looking around the audience, I'm guessing that we're not likely to have any public comment this evening on this important topic, but we did have it listed, as we said earlier, on Shape San Carlos, and we got 15 unique responses from folks in town, and not really surprisingly to me, about 80% of those who responded, and this is a limited sample size, it's still a new system, so we had 15 respondents. 12 of the 15, 80%, supported license plate readers in town. One opposed it, two opposed it in terms of the mobile, and a couple of people were undecided. One of the primary comments that people made was about length of time, and they were uncertain about what the length of time for data storage was. I can tell you, having worked here a long time, and I think many of you on City Council know this, when we have a rash of burglaries in town, and it seems like every year we go through a period of time where we have a month with quite a few burglaries, people in this town are up in arms. Most of these types of robberies, burglaries, and thefts are occurring from people who live outside of this community. I've often heard the chief refer to San Carlos as a Nordstrom's for thieves. People are coming here to take advantage of our citizens. This tool is not a perfect tool. I wish we lived in a world where we didn't need these tools, but I think just about every tool, every investigatory tool and database that's been put in place for the last 30 years in public safety has come with the same kind of criticisms in terms of invasion of privacy. I just remind the council, license plates don't belong to individuals, they belong to the public. Our roadways don't belong to individuals, they belong to the public. There is no perception of privacy when you're driving on the street. Any police officer could pull you over for any number of reasons because you have a partial plate that was put into a system for potential burglary or robbery. So really what we're doing is we're making our officers smarter by giving them more technology. And I think everybody on the council's had an opportunity to ride in a patrol vehicle. And they're incredible vehicle. They are chock full of technology. I often wonder how a patrol officer can drive his vehicle, operate all the systems in place, and then boom, out of nowhere, while you're just the passenger not doing any of this, they spot somebody who ran a red light and they go into stop mode. It's very impressive. This is another tool, one that certainly we want to have policies in place and training in place to make sure that we don't take advantage of it. Like everything we do in public safety, we want to put the public's trust first, but the people in San Carlos expect us to keep them safe and their property safe, and this is one more opportunity to put a powerful arrow in our quiver to do that. And that's why we're bringing it forward to you, and that's why I not only support this proposal, but over time would like to see it expanded in San Carlos.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
As Jeff mentioned, I don't have any cards from anybody in the public wishing to address the council on this topic, but if there's anybody who wishes to, please step forward. All right. I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move to authorize a request for proposal for the purchase and installation of one fixed automated license plate reader and one mobile automated license plate reader.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion for make sure that we can discuss this.
Sure. Fine. Okay, there is a motion and a second. Discussion. Who would like to go first?
I'll go first. I have no problem with getting an RFP for this item. This will give us another chance to think about it over the time. I don't know. I assume it takes 30 or 60 days to get the RFP or whatever. But it'll come back just when we get the RFP. We may or may not. It may be $400,000 or maybe $2,000. If I was Piedmont, like I said, we get a discount. But we should hook up with Piedmont when they buy some more. But I honestly think that the one possibly at 101 in Britain is again, I sometimes do things statistically in my head, and I think that makes some sense to me. The mobile one's harder for me because that to me that's a much different thing. And again, we're not talking about $1 million here, maybe $35,000 or $30,000. I'm not sure. I'd like to know what the costs are before I make a final decision on any of this. But I'm more than willing to do the RFP.
Okay. Other comments? Matt?
Okay.
I thought you were reaching for your mic.
I was. Number one, related to what Bob just said, segue off of that, I would go exactly the opposite. I would be more inclined to do 2 readers, actually, for 2 mobile vehicles than to do a fixed one at a certain location. And that's because, as the city manager said, all that technology is doing is making the officer smarter, if you will. It's giving them the ability to see things more acutely than they can otherwise, and they use a lot of technology, is my understanding. It's always changing to do that, to do their jobs. But to set up a camera at a fixed location, to me, is like setting up a trap almost. It's, I respect what law enforcement does, but I respect our liberty more. And it's a little bit like panning for gold. You just pick up all the rocks, and then you sift out and you decide, what's gold, what isn't. And that's essentially what you're doing, which, we're a society based upon certain unalienable rights. And one of the tenets of those rights is that we're presumed innocent. And to trap everybody in a trap, you're presuming everybody's guilty, and then you're deciding who's not guilty afterwards. And I don't like that. With a reader on a vehicle, like I said, what that's doing is that's helping an officer. It's giving him if he drives by a vehicle, it's going the other way. It gives him an alarm system right away. Hey, that's the bad guy we're looking for. That's fine. That opened up that officer's eyes. I don't see that with a fixed location. The answer to the fixed location, the way around that, if you will, not that I'm looking for a way around my own predicament or something like that, but unalienable rights don't apply when you go on someone's private property, not to the fullest extent. I have a right as a property owner to surveil my property if I so choose. If there's a problem with burglaries at REI or any other store location in town, that tenant or property owner has a right to put a camera in, and they can do that, and they can use that data to help you guys. I'm all for it, but I'm just not for government having that access.
Okay, other comments? Cameron? Oh, and by the way, everybody can feel free, you don't have to. I will try and keep looking, but that top button here actually is a way, now that we're all in a row, for me to see who actually wants to speak.
So I support the readers. I have concerns about privacy, but when I think about this specific issue, I think this is about making something that law enforcement is already doing more effective. Essentially, as Jeff pointed out, we have public safety officers out there with their eyes open, always looking to see what's going on. And if you drive by with your car, they can see your license plate, note what it is, and they can research it and find out if they think they have a reason to be suspicious. This basically makes that process a lot more efficient and a lot more effective. And given the data retention policies, and I believe that the law enforcement community in our city is taking it very seriously. So I'm fine moving forward with this. I think it probably isn't going to be a huge change in terms of the ability to combat crime. I think it'll probably help on the margins, but crime is relatively low, and so any marginal help is a positive one. In terms of where to put them, I kind of defer to law enforcement. I would be very interested to see what the success rate is. I think trying one permanent and one mobile unit sounds like an interesting plan. But for me, it's really about just giving law enforcement one more tool in the arsenal, and I'm happy to support it.
Okay, Ron?
Yeah, first of all, thank you, gentlemen. Excellent, thorough presentation. I'm a little torn. I sort of find myself agreeing with Matt in this situation that if we're going to do surveillance, it ought to be targeted. I'm reminded of that statement. I don't know who said it, was Ben Franklin, those who would sacrifice liberty for safety have neither. And I apologize. I just can't help. There's something about this that bothers me. Not that I'm personally about to go out and break the law, but I have issues with it. Maybe it needs to evolve a little bit more for my own personal liking, but it's getting awful close to Big Brother. And like Cameron says, I'm not sure that the crime in our town really rises to that level. Although I was really surprised to see those comments on Shape San Carlos that people said not only do we need them, but we need as many as possible. So, I hate being contrary to what law enforcement wants. I've always supported them, and they know that. But in this case, I don't know, my level of discomfort is higher than my level of comfort with it. I may change my mind at some point, but right now I'm not sure I can support it.
Thank you, Ron. I too have kind of mixed feelings about this one. Actually, it's kind of interesting here because automated license plate readers came up in a discussion. I had Ron. I don't know if it was you with me or somebody. It was one other person from the dais. Council retreat, but even before that, had a conversation with Chief Rothaus about this in April of 2013, I think it was, because there was a rash of door knock burglaries shortly before that, and we were responding to it. And it sounded like, oh, that sounds like a fairly clever idea. Maybe we should think about doing that. And then about 2 weeks later, the Edward Snowden thing broke. And I remember talking to the chief afterwards going, well, that sort of puts the kibosh on doing anything like that for a while. And really my own thinking on this subject kind of evolved as a result of that. I have nothing but respect for our law enforcement people, for the people at NCRIC. I think it's wonderful that you're putting policies in place. Like you, I think it's appalling that other jurisdictions are warehousing this kind of data without policies, because that just sounds like a ticket to disaster on the civil liberties front. So, my next comments have nothing to do with the individuals here. But, like it or not, we can't afford to forget that, there are organizations like the NSA. Centralizing data makes it a nice, rich target to go after. More importantly, whatever one may feel about what Snowden did, one of the things that it shined a light on is, things inside of the NSA where there actually were code words for the kinds of searches where people were keeping track of ex-lovers and ex-girlfriends and ex-boyfriends and ex-spouses. That's human nature. That kind of stuff happens. The point being that when you have data available, if it's a powerful tool, it has also the power to be abused. So as a practical matter, I view this as a matter of balancing a bunch of different priorities. You can clearly tell from my comments, my concerns on the civil liberties side. I am going to vote against this proposal, but mostly just as a signal that if it were to come back, or we were to come back with a proposal with a much shorter time frame on the data retention, I picked the number 90 days. I think Menlo Park actually did something like that when they had this to discuss, or they may have done 6 months. That would make me more amenable to doing it. Yes, I know that will not cover all the kinds of investigations that we would like to do, but of the kinds of investigations we mostly have to do in San Carlos, I think it would cover them, and it would preserve some of the other things that I and my colleagues have touched on here. So with that, we have a motion and a second. Crystal, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Collins?
No.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
No. All right. Thank you, gentlemen. That brings us to item 10B, consideration of approving a resolution setting a public hearing on December 8th, 2014 to consider 2015 residential and commercial solid waste collection services pursuant to Proposition 218. Director Walter, how are you this evening? Nice job on the facilities, by the way.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be happy to pass those compliments on to the various folks that were involved in this, and it is something to be very much proud of. And I imagine for the council members who had not served for quite some time, when the doors opened and they came in, it was quite a shock to see the difference. So anyway, so this evening we're here to talk about the 2015 solid waste rates. And I'll be doing the presentation tonight, but I just want the council to know that we have some help in the audience. Marshall Moran, the finance manager for the SBWMA, is in the back, as is Mario Puccinelli and Gino Gasparini from Recology. So as our collection contractor, if there are any questions that the council may want to know about that are very detailed, we certainly have these resources available to you to answer those questions. So I'll go ahead, though, and go through the presentation, present the information and the options for council and the direction that we need. I'll let you know of the direction that we need for tonight. So tonight we will be talking about the rate setting process, at least briefly, for the benefit of those at home and a reminder for the council. We have the 2015 rate and the revenue requirements, which I'll be going over briefly. We also will talk a little bit about residential cart rate alignment, which is a subject that the council has had on the radar screen for a number of years now, as the costs for servicing the carts do not align with the rates charged for the various carts. And so we'll talk about that. Last year we made an adjustment in order to try to get a little closer on a couple of the cart sizes. So we'll talk about that tonight as well. And then we also tonight have low-income rate options for the council to consider, a program for those folks who may need some help on a monthly basis with their trash rates, and we have some things for the council to consider and to give staff direction on. So as far as the solid waste rate process goes, Recology, the collection services contractor, and South Bay Recycling, the operator of the Shoreway facility where all the trash and recyclables goes, they submit rate applications to the South Bayside Waste Management Authority, and they do that in the springtime. So they prepare what their the applications that has information about what their rates need to be and the revenue needs to be for the upcoming year. Typically, those applications come in the late spring, and the review and revisions are completed by the summer, and that happened here summer 2014. The SBWMA board then reviews and approves the revenue requirements for both of these contractors, and that was completed at their meeting of September 25th, 2014, and Mayor Olbert is the council member on that board, and he was present at that meeting. And basically what it had is the total contractor's compensation and other pass-through costs, the disposal fees and the franchise fees, which are what the city has included in the rate revenue requirement. And that information essentially was made public, and the board approved that at the time. And that set in motion the clock for member agencies of SBWMA to set their annual rates. And that's the point where we are in progress right now, as well as other agencies in the SBWMA rate area. So as far as 2015, the revenue requirement, the estimated 2015 San Carlos revenue requirement is about $7.9 million. And again, that is made up of the contractor's compensation and the disposal costs and the agency franchise fees and other costs that are included. Now, the estimated collection revenue at the current rates that were set for 2014 is a little over $8 million. And so you can see that this results in an estimated $207,000 surplus for 2015, which means that if the council made no action, changed no rates at all for 2015, based on the current rates, we would potentially have a surplus at the end of 2015. And again, how does that number break down? We look at the base revenue at 2014 rates of a little over $8 million. And we have the Recology Services compensation, which is a little over $5 million. And then the South Bay recycling and disposal and processing costs of about $1.8 million. The city costs and franchise fees of about $942,000. The city costs and franchise fees are approximately, they're made up of a 10% franchise fee that the city charges, as well as some costs to recover staff time for administering the program. We have a cost in there that pays for street sweeping, as well as cleaning garbage and recycling containers. So some other small fees that we have some detail on, but that totals up to about $950,000. And then that results in that $207,000 estimated surplus for 2015. And again, we mentioned at the brief meeting we had in September that the $207,000 is an estimate of surplus. It's not hard cash. It's not immediately available to the council, but it is an estimate. And we look at this, I've come to kind of recognize these as snapshots in time, because they will change over the course of the year. When you take a different snapshot, your numbers will be slightly different. In looking at the revenue, one of the things that always has to be taken into consideration is it's not simply 1 year that we're having to deal with. We're always dealing with at least 3 years of revenue and reconciliation. When we look at the number that is proposed as a surplus in 2015, we see that $207,000. But we're also still looking at what is the actual amount that's been collected from 2014, because that year is not yet complete. And we also are still looking at what the final estimated surplus or shortfall will be for 2013. So at least those 3 years are always in play. And in this case, in particular this year, there is some final accounting that now has resulted in the number for 2012 that is an actual number, no longer an estimate. Now, when you take these numbers together, you can see that there is an estimated surplus of almost $400,000 for that range of years and the numbers at this point where we've taken the snapshot. And again, this is just an estimate. And what that does is it gives you an indication that, another indication that the rates currently set are sufficient to cover the revenue requirements. So one of the things that we wanted to talk to the council about tonight and propose is that based on those numbers, we would see that there is no need for a general rate increase across the board. That is, we feel confident that if rates stayed the same for the residential and commercial customers without being increased, that we would be able to cover the revenue requirements that have been identified. One of the items, however, that is subject to change on an annual basis are what's called unscheduled services. And those are the special services that take place for our customers in San Carlos, such as backyard collection, transporting carts to and from the collection vehicle, and overage or special collection events that occur throughout the year. The costs for these unscheduled services are paid directly by the subscribing customers. So there is no general across-the-board cost to every ratepayer for these. It is strictly by a subscription basis. If you don't want to have any of these things, you don't have to pay for any of them. However, in 2015, the unscheduled service costs have been identified to increase by about 1.47%. And that's based on the predetermined index that's in the franchise agreement. It's the U.S. Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics, Consumer Price Index, all urban consumers, U.S. city average. So a mouthful, and certainly not something that we look at each year, but it is part of the contract, and so this is an adjustment that we will recommend to the council be made this year. So on the subject of cart migration, I mentioned earlier that the city had been looking at cart migration and cart alignment over the last several years. And the basic idea of this is that over the years, as we have emphasized recycling and diversion from the landfill and trying to recycle more and more with organics as well as the other types of recyclables, we've seen a movement from folks as they get rid of their larger garbage cans. They move to a smaller garbage can, and you can see by the numbers on the screen that in 2013, from 2013 to 2014, we did have changes, again, along the lines we'd expect. There was an increase in the number of 20-gallon containers and a decrease in the larger containers. And that's a good thing because we continue to see that movement, which indicates that folks are throwing away less and diverting more to recycling. So last year, we put together a proposal for the council to help encourage those folks to continue to migrate to the smaller carts. And what we did was we applied a decrease to the two largest cart sizes in the residential category and applied those in the 2014 rates. And so one of the things that we'd like the council to consider as we go into the rate setting process is an additional decrease to those two largest cart sizes. And one of the main reasons for doing that, if you'll see on the screen, you can look at the 64-gallon and 96-gallon carts, and you can see that the 2014 rate for those is $57 and $83. And then you look across to the column that says actual cart costs, and you can see that it costs our contractors significantly less to actually dump those size carts. So the residents who have those carts are paying more, and what we're doing is we're finding that we want to bring the cost of the service a little closer to the rates. So we would be proposing that the council consider another decrease to the two largest cart sizes. And as we have seen this regular practice of migration, I think this will have little effect on that. There is a total $94,500 loss of revenue in that regard. That is, that's revenue that we would not be getting from those customers if we allow those decreases. But based on the estimates for this rate period that we're in, we believe that that is something that is sustainable going forward. And on the far right side, the box that I've just zoomed in is it gets us a little bit closer to the actual cost of the cart to the rate. So the low-income rate program. Back in last year, council directed us to look into this process to try to find a way for some of our low-income households to get some rate relief from garbage rates. And so we checked in with our friends at PG&E, and they have identified the PG&E Care program, which is a way for folks to have a reduced utility bill in town. And we also looked at a neighbor across the mountains by the coast in Pacifica, and they have what's called a Lifeline program. And what they do is essentially they've linked it to the CARE program, where it offers that opportunity for rate flexibility. And it essentially is based on the eligibility requirements of the PG&E program to be able to take advantage of that in that city. However, one thing to consider, this does require a rate subsidy. So if we were to reduce the rates for those low-income folks, the council has to determine the source of the funding that would pay that subsidy, because these cannot be paid by other garbage customers. So it would have to be a different source of funding, because from a Prop 218 equity standpoint, we wouldn't want to have some customers paying for the garbage service for other customers. A little bit more on this. We've assumed, based on the Pacifica program, in our numbers, a 15% discount on the cart rate. Now, there's options. In Pacifica, they require every one of their customers to have the smallest cart size, and they apply the 15% reduction to that. Council could pick that, or council could pick to apply it to all of the cart sizes that those low-income households currently have. That's a decision that will have to be made. In San Carlos, there's 1,400 care-qualified residents, which seemed kind of like a high number. But according to PG&E, that's the number that are qualified. There's only 640 that are currently enrolled in the CARE program. And so we can make assumptions about the revenue that would be lost on this, and two assumptions just for discussion purposes. If only the 640 were currently enrolled and we had the smallest cart size, there would be a requirement for about $24,000 in subsidy to manage that program. However, if all 1,400 enrolled in the program and we used it to be any cart size, our estimate would be closer to $84,000. As you can see, there would be quite a bit more, and the larger cart sizes cost more, so that subsidy as a 15% reduction would be more based on that. So we have a range there, and that's something that we want to get direction from you as council to tell us, are you comfortable with this program? Where would you like us to go with it? And what's the number that you'd like to see us try to achieve? So the recommendations for tonight, so we can begin the discussion. We need you to authorize us to issue the notice of hearing pursuant to Prop 218 to hold the hearing on December 8th to increase the solid waste rates. And that is strictly related to the 1.47% increase for the unscheduled services. We also would like you to give us direction on whether to adjust the cost of the large residential garbage carts to continue this effort to achieve rate alignment. And we've proposed a $5 monthly decrease for the 64-gallon size and a $15 monthly decrease for the 96-gallon cart size. And we'd also like to have you give us direction on whether we should implement the low-income program and whether you want us to identify the source of revenue that could be used as a subsidy for that, and the sort of the shape and size of the program that you'd like to see if you want one. And then give us direction, too, to include in the notice of rate hearing that there would be no changes in the following garbage customers, and that is the two smallest residential sizes, the 20-gallon or 32-gallon size, and commercial customers would have no rate increases, no changes. The next steps, if we receive direction from council tonight, the Prop 218 notice needs to be sent by October 24th to have the 45 days before the December 8th public hearing for garbage rates, and then those adopted rates would be effective after January 1st. The first billing cycle is, I believe, end of February for San Carlos, and so we would want to be ready for that first bill that went out in 2015. At this point, I'd be happy to take questions. And again, resources in the audience if council has more detailed questions than I can take. So, Mr. Mayor.
And thank you, Marshall, Gino, and Mario for being here. Questions for staff? Cameron.
Thanks, Jay. Can you talk a little bit about the goal of aligning rates with the cart sizes? Why does that serve our interest to do that? Why have we sort of adopted that strategy?
One of the things to consider with the and perhaps City Attorney Rubens can help me with this answer too. But as we look at the rate that's charged for a particular service, we want to ensure that that rate is essentially equitable to the service provided. So if we have a a cost for providing a service, and we charge a rate that's much higher than the cost to provide that service, then we're subject to some scrutiny over that. And on the other side, if we have a rate that doesn't cover the cost of the service, then I think we end up having the question of, well, you should probably look at trying to raise rates on those that don't cover cost and lower rates on ones that are more than enough for cost. So that's been the city's effort over the last several years. And before I took over the trash program, that was the direction that was moving, largely based on the idea that you would incentivize people to get away from large garbage carts by having them recycle more and then pay less for the smaller garbage carts.
Okay, so today, effectively, though, we have people who are using larger carts subsidizing people who are using smaller carts. The question I have is, if you lower the rates on larger carts, I mean, inevitably, are you imagining that we're going to have to raise rates on lower carts at some point? And does it not, I mean, given exactly what you just said about wanting to incentivize people to, throw away less trash, does it make sense to lower the rates on the largest carts?
I think what we've seen over the last number of years, first of all, is that the two large cart sizes represent a very small percentage overall of the residential garbage carts. It's about 12%, excuse me, or something like that. And so I think the movement has been for folks, they're getting used to the idea that we need to recycle more. And as we again have to meet diversion targets at the state, there's continuing to be that emphasis on recycling. So what we have not seen is the cart migration ending. We've continued to see migration towards the smaller cart sizes. So
But sorry to cut you off. I mean, if you lower the price, presumably it's going to slow the rate at which people change. Or there will be more people who will say...
Actually, the empirical data shows that's not necessarily the case.
Did we recently lower the rates on big carts?
We did that last year.
And actually, before that, probably the single biggest thing that increased diversion was when we went to single stream recycling. It had nothing to do with rates. It just was a convenience thing. You didn't have to separate your recycling.
Okay.
So if I could answer the second part of your question.
Sure.
Yes, I believe it's inevitable that we will need to raise the rates on the smaller cart sizes simply to cover the costs of performing the service. But there is a bigger kind of picture exercise that's needed in that regard. We need to take a look at the commercial rates that are charged, excuse me, and the residential rates that are charged to determine that over all of those classifications in both those categories, we have some equity in terms of the rate being charged and the service being provided, the cost of the service being provided. So I believe we're moving in a direction where the reduction on the large cart sizes will not cause, I don't believe, a kind of a migration back to the large carts because they're cheaper and they can throw away more. I think we're still going to be held to those heavy diversion targets in the next several years. And so I think at this point, we're in good shape to move forward with one more reduction on those larger carts.
Okay. Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions, I guess 3 or 4. The special services, do we know what percentage of total revenue that includes? It's pretty small, isn't it? I mean, I would assume.
And I don't know that number. Okay. I can turn to our
Marshall?
To Marshall.
Yeah, like 3%, something like that. Okay, so it's yeah, that's what I figured. I just thought I'd ask because I just want to make sure everybody understands this 1.7% increase isn't going to generate $1 gazillion in any way, shape, or form.
No, it.
The Lifeline program, if there were 640 people that were using it, let's say for PG&E, they are not necessarily all people who live in single-family homes. I would assume.
That's true.
There would be some that would be renting that have to pay their own PG&E bill. They may be in an apartment that doesn't pay garbage separately. However, they don't have to pay their garbage. So I'm not quite sure how that, I mean, of course, this whole program is going to be, I think, difficult to manage. In that, just that one instance where someone may, their garbage rate for whatever reason, or their garbage is paid by the landlord, so they're not going to get a benefit of lowering this. They're not going to be able to qualify for this.
No, I think one of the things to point out is since we don't know exactly who would enroll,
Right.
who would be qualified, and who would have a separate garbage bill
Right.
that this could apply to, we simply used some estimates to give the council an idea of how much it might cost
No, I
if you
understand
wanted
that.
to
I wasn't
do it.
looking at the cost, Mr. Walter. I'm just making the point to the council that just because there's 640 or 1,400 doesn't mean that's the number of people that would theoretically be able to qualify for this, because they maybe don't pay the garbage bill separately. They may pay PG&E separately, but they don't necessarily pay the other. That's the only point I was making, not the dollars.
Right.
Excuse me. The third thing is the actual 2012 money, the 200,000 plus whatever it is there, the actual money, that will never go away. In other words, what I'm saying is it's not a use it or lose it type of situation. It's going to still keep carrying over until we do use it. Like let's say this program of lowering rates would cost $94,000. That would come off of that right away.
That's actual money that
Right,
could
that's
apply
actual
towards
that come
that.
off of actual. We'd still end up with 116,000 left or whatever.
That's right.
In actual, that will never go away. Until we use it, it will never go away.
That's right.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure that doesn't go. And the last thing, I guess, is the commercial question.
Actually, if
I'm
I
sorry.
could,
Sure, I'm sorry.
council member, it's not only that until we use it, but until another snapshot in time might show that there's a shortfall somewhere else. So in other words, it's not easy to count on that money as money in pocket. It's simply money that is available to the overall total. So in other words, it's not so much that we can just use it and spend it how we want. We have to be careful because it's possible a snapshot later on in the year or next year may reveal some other shortfall that 200,000 might be valuable
I understand
for.
that. I was trying to identify, though, that it doesn't disappear because it's 2012. We may be talking about 2012 in 3 years. It might still be possible. It could still be sitting there, is my point, because it's an actual number.
Mm-hmm.
The others estimated, I understand, can go up or down. The last question I had was on commercial. We don't have, apparently in the report, I didn't see it, maybe I missed it, we don't have numbers of the commercial cans. In other words, you had it for the residential ones. In other words, the users, or I guess in your report you showed it. It wasn't really in our report, but you showed it in your thing, your presentation. But what is we don't know how many commercial cans at 32 or commercial cans at 64.
Well, there's a whole different range of options for commercial customers. So there's the small carts, there's large carts, there's small bins, large bins, and other kinds of things like that. So at this point, no, we haven't dealt with the commercial side of the house at this particular point in time.
Okay. Now, are those numbers but even though we haven't dealt with it, is that number in the $7.8 million or the $8.094 million?
Absolutely.
So there is some monies. I guess I'm trying to. Oh, boy, I didn't see that one.
That's because it was a slide I saved as a backup in case I needed it.
Okay. Hello.
So you can see
That's good.
that total number of a little over 8 million is the total collection
I get it.
revenue, and
Okay.
it breaks down into commercial
Well,
and
that's why-
residential there.
Well, boy, talk about ask a question, get an answer. You got it. I got it. Okay, thanks. So a substantial amount for the commercial, which we never really have dived into, which probably we need to dive into
That's right.
to some extent. Okay, great. Thanks.
And if I could, Mr. Mayor, if I might add, the intent, as I've talked to the city manager about this, is that we would take on the task of looking at the commercial and residential rates together in 2015, with the target of 2016 having a comprehensive report of what it might look like going forward as we would try to get alignment between the two and look at the way that commercial is paying more of the cost of the overall collection revenue than residential is. So that's something that we plan to undertake in the next year. I just didn't have time to get to that entirely comprehensive review this year.
Mr. Mayor, could I just one more quick question? I'm sorry, now that I'm looking at this, so I understand what it says. Residential revenue 3.4, commercial revenue 4.6, which equals the 8.094.
That's correct.
the cost, what's this negative 23% or minus 23%?
So you look at the residential cost is actually 4.2 million.
Right.
And you can see what the residential revenue is, 3.4 million. So it's basically, it's under
It's the
collected by
margin.
23%.
Okay, I wasn't sure if it went down that much or it's the margin.
It's the
Okay,
margin, yeah.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it.
Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had, I wanted to clarify something, and I think the mayor helped clear it up for me. And I guess it's counterintuitive, because my impression or my thinking was that if there's cart migration to lower prices for larger carts, that might result in people just saying, oh, what the heck, I'll just keep my larger cart because it's costing me less. But is that not the case?
It's not the case based on what we saw in this most recent year. And let me find the right slide there. That's the right slide. So you can still see that there is a movement. The 96-gallon carts, for example, we had a change last year. 17 people got rid of their largest cart to go to some smaller size. And then likewise in the 64-gallon category, 38 customers got rid of that large cart and went to a different size. And so we are seeing that over the course of last year, we still have seen the migration away.
Is this a combination of commercial and residential?
This is residential numbers
Residential
only.
only?
Yes.
Okay. All right. A question came up today when talking with some of the people I know that are familiar with this, and they mentioned Ox Mountain. And Ox Mountain, I guess, is going to close at some point. Any guess as to when it will? And if so, what sort of impact will that have? I realize maybe that's long term, but I've heard 2 years, I've heard 5 years, I think the city manager told me 8 to 10 years. So is that about right?
I'll ask my resources to help me, but I believe it's 2019.
What does that mean?
That's when the last truck can show up.
But you said the contract. So do you just sign a new contract? Is that all?
Depends on what it costs.
All right.
We'll put it out to bid.
Could you come to the microphone, because we need to record this?
We definitely want the folks at home to hear.
Gino Gasparini with Recology, San Mateo County, Mayor Olbert, and members of the council. I'm not part of the negotiating team, nor does Recology have anything to do with Ox Mountain. That is actually owned by Republic Collection Services or Republic Services. This contract the SBWMA does have with Ox Mountain goes to 2019. At that time, the contract can either be renegotiated for a favorable tipping fee, or it can be, as Marshall mentioned, it can go out to other disposal sites for as an RFP for a disposal rate as well.
So let's assume that you want to continue with Ox Mountain, because I assume they're the closest. And I realize it's 5 years out, but have you put any numbers out or thought about any numbers as what sort of increases our ratepayers might be expected to see?
Again, I'm not part of that, but you're absolutely right, Mr. Collins, that Ox Mountain is certainly the closest. It's within the county, right. And the operating or the travel time is certainly beneficial to us. What the SBWMA and you as member agencies will negotiate is there are other options outside of the county, and depending upon what the gate rate will be, the per ton cost, it could very well be favorable to actually drive at a further distance to actually keep the rate similar, less, or it could be very well more. Again, that's part of the RFP process.
Right. Sure.
Okay. Hello, Mario.
Good evening, Mario Puccinelli with Recology San Mateo County. Just to add to what Gino has been saying, with the increase in recycling awareness and volumes, landfills have gained longevity, and so there's a lot of landfills who will be shopping for the tons from the SBWMA service area because they don't have. They're not getting the volume that they used to get in. So, and I don't want to speak for the SBWMA. Marshall is here, but there should be some favorable numbers.
Thank you.
I think we're fine. Matt, you were done, right? I'm done. Okay, Matt.
Okay. So I just had a couple of questions regarding the recommended rate changes and the numbers, because trying to figure out what's the long-term goal or approach here that we're trying to do. I understand we're trying to compress, but it's just curious to me that on the 64-gallon we're coming down about 60%, and on the 96-gallon, the largest, we're coming down 72%, 73%. Any reason for that? You know, one's a bigger step than the other, just even in terms of percentages.
Right, and I think maybe the way to describe it is the 5 and 15 are certainly numbers that the city manager and I discussed as the option that we would propose to the council to go forward with. It certainly is not something that we feel is just absolutely rock solid. We must go in this direction. Council could decide to do either more or less if they chose to. But when I look at the difference from the actual cart cost on that far right column, I'm looking at trying to get kind of a bracket around. We have smaller carts that we're paying not enough to dump, and we have larger carts that we're paying more than enough to dump. So I'm trying to kind of get that range a little closer together. And so what I see with these now is that my smallest cart is about $18 less than what it's being charged at $18 less than what it actually costs. And with this change, our largest cart will be about $20 more than what it's going to be charged. So that's kind of the bracket that I was trying to achieve.
Yeah, I got you. You're doing the sort of the parentheses approach.
That's the way I looked at it.
Yeah.
They're not, of course, the number of carts is not exactly the same, but that's sort of the direction that I wanted to go with it.
Gotcha. Okay. And in a similar fashion, the 1.47, it's an odd percentage. Why that number?
Oh, that's
what's the thinking behind that one?
That's entirely based on that consumer price index that I mentioned is as part of the franchise agreement. That essentially they take all those numbers that make up the consumer price index and it spits out the 1.47%. And so we're bound by that too.
We're bound by it.
That's the Recology puts that forward as the increase or the adjustment for the unscheduled services, and per the franchise agreement, we're bound to carry that forward.
And there's no, I've brought this up before with staff, there's no, just when we look at our fees and so forth, we're not allowed to do, you know, my son in second grade learned about rounding. We can't do rounding. You know what I'm saying? Either do 1.5 increase, or actually look at the number that it's spitting out, the cost, the charge. You know, if it's $5.63, forget the 3 cents. You know, just $5.60, make it easier.
I think actually Matt raises a good point in the sense that my understanding is we are not bound by those numbers. Those are what our costs are going up by. The rates are, I mean, we could choose to set the rates at something totally independent of cost. We would just either be getting money from Recology at the end of the year or owing the money at the end of the year. So in other words, we can do that kind of rounding if that's what we wish to do.
Right, but I think I want to make sure that I'm clear. The unscheduled services are subscription-based only. So that doesn't apply to everybody generally.
I know, yeah.
So it is as was pointed out, a very small piece of the pie overall, but it is directly related only to those people who want it. I think we just fall back on the information provided by Recology is that it's 1.47%. I think the math is probably a lot more complicated than that, and so we just bring that forward and pass that along to those folks who choose to have those services, and that might make someone think twice it might be a number that they think, well, okay, now it's too expensive. I won't have them do that for me anymore.
Okay. And so my last question is, I suppose the other thing that we could choose to do as a council tonight is, that's not on here, and this is a bit of a Machiavellian approach, but it's what we did last time, actually, and that is we could send out a notice, because we're voting to send out a Prop 218 notice.
Correct.
And the night of the hearing, we can set rates whatever we want as long as it's within what we noticed. So I suppose what we could do is say, hey, we are going to, we're going to propose to the public that we want to try and recoup some of these costs that we're not getting right now with these smaller carts, see what kind of response we get. Maybe we look like heroes because people show up here and say, no, you're not going to raise my little cart to $40. And we say, yeah, you're right, we're not. We look like heroes, but I mean, that's an extreme approach. But what I'm saying to the council and asking staff is we can put some increases in here as well on the lower end, and then the night of the hearing actually set the rates.
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay. Just wanted to be clear on that.
Thank you, Matt. A few questions. I certainly understand that those surpluses and deficits from various years tend to fluctuate as the years go by. Has staff ever looked at the, for lack of a better term, the trajectory of those? In other words, if it first rolls out as a surplus of X dollars, does it actually flip to a deficit the next year and the surplus the year after that, or does it sort of stay within some reasonable band? I'm just curious. If you haven't looked at it, it might be something to look at offline.
And I'll admit that I haven't looked at it with the exception of just these last couple of years that I've been involved in this program. I know we ended up with a surplus based on our snapshot from last year, and it didn't turn out to be exactly the same amount of that surplus, but I can't recall how much one way or the other that changed.
Goofy, nobody could ever understand it, and it went 6
I'm just
ways.
talking about the last few years.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, the last 2 years, I mean, okay, well, yeah.
What's staff's understanding of what's driving our costs down? In other words, what's generating the surpluses?
I don't have a good feel for that. That may be something that Marshall may be able to shed a little bit more light on than I can, as he sees the SBWMA as a whole and all the agencies as well. So,
Marshall?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. Marshall Moran, South Bayside Waste Management Authority. Just for the history, San Carlos has gone from ending 2010 with a shortfall owed to Allied of $3.5 million. We ended 2011 with 800,000 shortfall. 2012 it was 640. 2013 it went back up to about 886. And then last year it was a positive surplus of 287, and next year we're projecting 459. So over time, those one-time events have been basically paid for. That Allied balance was paid off. The rates were set to cover these one-time events, and now there's a surplus because those events are in the past.
My other question, thank you, that was the question I asked previously. The most recent question was, do we know why our costs are going down?
Recology's compensation adjustment for next year in total was a 0.2% cost increase, which is almost zero. For San Carlos, it actually went down 2.2% just because of the way costs get allocated. So the hours in San Carlos relative to the other cities went down. So San Carlos got a 2.2%, or I think it was a $200,000 cost reduction, and the Shoreway tip fees next year will not increase. So that also has helped stabilize your costs for next year.
Thank you. Jay, can you put up that slide you had that showed the residential versus commercial balances again? The secret Bob slide? Well, I should say it's the secret J slide for Bob.
He knew that question was coming, that's why he had it for me. Pull that rabbit out.
Was this in the staff report?
This was not. This was just information which I thought was helpful for council to see that.
Very much so, and just for future reference, I would have liked to have seen that in the staff report. And the reason is because it leads to my question for you, Jay, which is, I know we haven't done the commercial in-depth study, but looking at these numbers, unless, because we have them out to 7 figures, so presumably there's some detail behind them. Why would we not begin the process of trying to rebalance between the commercial and residential sides of the house? I mean, basically what this is saying is that the commercial accounts are generating $1 million more in revenue than the cost of providing the service, and the residential accounts are costing about $800,000, is that right? $800,000 more than the service. So why wouldn't we do that?
Well, I think
what are we going to learn from the study that this doesn't tell us? Well, you can start making some movement because you're going to have to go in that direction anyway.
Well, I think it's going to give us a lot of detail on the various commercial accounts and the bins and carts and things that they use, and the same thing on the residential side. And so my thought was we needed to have both the residential and commercial information together in one study to kind of justify that we would move in the direction of adjusting one way or the other. So I didn't want to start into it without a good, complete picture of information.
Because I'll tell you what worries me here is, and the Prop 218 cost versus revenue equity balance issue is it's not necessarily down to the penny, and it's all, of course, whether you measure it individually or you measure it in categories. But, round numbers, if you wanted to balance the residential side of the house, you'd have to increase rates by almost 25%, right? $800,000 on a $3.4 million base, a little bit less than 25%. That's a heck of an increase. I mean, I agree with the logic staff presented in terms of getting rid of or reducing the significant gap between cost and revenue on the larger carts, but I look at that and go, wow, okay, that's really the elephant in the room.
I would agree, and I believe that's why we need a really good plan to approach that. I kind of feel like that's not something we want to take one bite at, but we want to try to develop for council an option that would provide maybe several years of adjustment that would ultimately result in getting us closer in terms of that balance that we'd like to see. So in my opinion, I felt like I needed to have that information before I'd be able to present a credible case to council.
Fair enough. For what it's worth, and I know people are busy, and hindsight's always wonderful, years when the cost-driven side of the house is basically not forcing us to increase rates would be great times to do it for this. We could end up being in a perfect storm where something happens that causes costs to go up in any event, and then have to layer on top of that some adjustments to balance commercial versus residential and hit people with a double whammy. So I really hope that we will have that study tied down by next year or even earlier. I mean, it's so big, actually, it might be useful not to talk about it in this kind of meeting next year, but ahead of time, just to do that. Okay, Matt, I see you have another question.
Yeah, just one more. When we're looking at these sort of the cost of picking up the different cart sizes, does that take into account that, a black cart comes with a big, usually, I mean, most of what you see around town is a big fat, I call it a yard waste collection cart, but you put food waste and other things in there. But the green one, the Army green one, and then there's a blue one, and then you have your black cart. And typically what you see, like I said, is you might see a smaller, I guess the 20-gallon black cart, and then you see what looks to be about, I guess it's a 32 or 64, the blue ones that people put their papers and, cans in. And then, like I said, the biggest thing you see is a big 96-gallon yard waste cart. That's all taken into account when you're putting together these numbers of how much it costs to pick up that can. You're saying we're picking up this can, but we're also picking up these other 2 cans as well. That's included?
The rate's based on the garbage cart, the size of the garbage cart. There are costs associated with the green waste cart and the recycle bin as well, but they're not detailed out separately, at least in terms of the rates that we set for the accounts in town.
So does that leave us some, the reason I asked the question is because the concern, I think I heard earlier from other council members, and you've raised it too, is, you can't be, with this Prop 218 stuff, you can't be subsidizing one man's garbage with another man's garbage, right? So, but it sounds like there's some squish in there, to use a technical term, because...
That's what happens inside the cart.
Yeah, exactly. Because of these other carts that are involved. And occasionally, I don't see them very often, but I've even seen a smaller blue cart and a smaller, I guess they're available, you just don't see them very often. So there's got to be some variables in there that are really hard to chase after. I don't know if Marshall, you got that data or not?
Actually, if I may, Matt, it's a very good question. In general, because I looked into this being on the SBWMA board, in general, if you think about the pickup costs versus the cost of disposing what's in the thing, the pickup costs are almost independent of the size of the cart. It's an automated system, right? In other words, it takes the same amount of time to pick up a 96-gallon cart, What really makes a difference is the black cart contents. You have to pay the tipping fee to get in the landfill. The recycling stuff, there's fees associated with it, but then the SBR, the South Bayside Recycling, earns money by selling the recyclables, okay? And then they use that to offset what they would otherwise charge for handling them. And something similar happens with the composting stuff as well. But in general, the pickup cost is the same for almost any size cart, because it's really driven by the labor of driving the truck down the street and picking up however many carts there are in front of the house.
And that's where we're ending up with a loss on the black carts with the little ones.
Well, that's actually probably, yes.
It's the pickup cost. Even though it's the most negligible part of it, it's the...
Right. I have sometimes told people that if everybody in San Carlos except me were to do 100% diversion and I was the only guy in town who had a black cart, my garbage fee would be about $3.4 million a year under our current system, because I'd be paying for everybody else's carts.
Thank you.
That was not an offer.
All right.
Okay, Jeff.
Right.
I was about to do that. So before we move further, I will entertain a motion to extend the meeting to 10:45. Seconds?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, we're on for 10:45. Thank you, Jay. I think that takes care of questions. I will entertain a motion.
Mayor, make a motion to approve resolution number 2014-99, resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos setting a public hearing on December 8, 2014 to consider 2015 residential and commercial solid waste collection services pursuant to Proposition 218 with the staff recommendations that are set out in the resolution and in the staff report.
A second.
There's a motion and a second. Discussion.
Can I put a competing motion on the table?
You certainly may.
All right. The motion I'd like to make is exactly as Mr. Grisilli made, except I would propose that we have rate increases on the 20-gallon cart and 32-gallon cart. So the 20-gallon cart to be, I'm just going to throw some numbers out here, $25, and the 32-gallon cart to be $35.
All right. Is there a second for the competing motion? All right.
Okay.
We pass for lack of a second.
Yes, sir.
Discussion on Bob's motion.
I would just like to throw out discussion on Bob's motion relative to why I did what I did, and that is 2 reasons. One, because eventually we're going to have to do that if we're going to compress these rates, number one. Number two, as you suggested, at some point, the mystery slide that we didn't all get, you're right, we're going to have to address that as well. So that's why I put it out there. It's not that I necessarily want to see rates go up, but like I said almost facetiously before, personally, I would like to put it out there, see if if the public's, how much they're paying attention, and B, what kind of response we get, so we get some idea of how people feel about these rates, and when it does come time to compress them, let's find out now instead of waiting till the evening that we have to do that. So.
Fair enough. It occurs to me as you were talking, Matt, it might be something not in the context of do you want to pay more for garbage service, but maybe that's also properly phrased, something else that could be done on the senior moment, the thing we saw earlier this evening, the outreach tool. Peak Democracy.
Peak Democracy. There you go.
Shape San Carlos. Thank you, Cameron.
That said, I'll go along with what Mr. Grisilli proposed. So.
The only comment I wanted to make actually was just something that I hadn't thought of before until relatively recently. We talk a lot about the need, and the state imposes requirements on us to do diversion, basically to get things out of landfill. One of the things that you have to be cognizant of is when we look at the data that we have, it's done by account. So we're talking about somebody downsizing a cart to a smaller cart. They're doing a better job at diversion for that account. Accounts have different numbers of people in them. If you think about it, you could have a family with 6 people living in a house and a family with 1 person living in a house, and the 1-person family might be doing an awful lot less in the way of diversion than the 6-person family. But still, the 6-person family is using a larger cart, so there's not a perfect mapping between the size of the cart and how well we're doing on diversion. Any other comments? If not, Crystal will call the roll.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. And that brings us, thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
That brings us to item 10C, consideration of adopting a resolution adopting the City of San Carlos strategic plan. Good evening, Tara.
Good evening, Council. My name is Tara Peters. I'm the assistant to the city manager, and I'm going to be as brief as possible on the strategic plan. I would like you to bear with me as I read some of the slides, just as a reminder. The mission statement, the City of San Carlos provides high-quality services and facilities in a fiscally sustainable, responsive, and friendly manner to foster a safe and healthy community. The vision statement is, by 2017, San Carlos will be a vibrant family and business-friendly community admired as a great place to live, learn, work, and play. This strategic plan that we just set in September, on September 17th, included a new section, which is 10-year targets and elements to define the vision. And listed here are some of those targets. And they're in your packet, so rather than read them, I'll just let you take a look at what's listed there. But there are several new additions to the goals. Oops, I apologize. The core values were next on the strategic plan, and those include fiscal responsibility and sustainability, protecting our environment, strategic thinking and planning for the future, high ethical standards, community involvement, high quality customer service, a strong sense of community, and public safety. The 3-year goals remain the same that we've seen in the past: community vitality, cohesion, engagement, effective and sustainable community health and public safety, facilities, infrastructure, and technology, economic development, and financial sustainability. And just briefly, this is a list of the last 6-month objectives that were met. Again, I won't read them. They're here summarized. And this is the last of them. And then in more detail, we have the 10-year target elements objectives. And I apologize for the small print here. There's a lot of data. Again, it's in your packet. I won't go over everything in detail for lack of time, but there are a lot of objectives here under the new elements and targets. And then, of course, we have the 3-year goals, and they also have their own set of objectives. And again, rather than go through them all because there's a lot, I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. Questions for staff?
Just one. Since I understand being brief, but just so the public knows, if they want to find this on our website, can you say where that would be found?
It's City of San Carlos. They should be able to find it under the city manager's department. I can't get more specific than that.
Yeah. But if they go under that tab, they'll find it
Yes.
there. Okay, good.
All right. Seeing as there are no other questions, I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I will move we adopt resolution 2014-100, a resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos adopting the City of San Carlos strategic plan.
Second.
All right. Motion and second. Is there any discussion? If not, Crystal, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Matt.
just so people understand why we didn't have any questions, maybe you might care to say how much time we spent working on that at our retreat.
That's fair enough, Matt. Thank you. Actually, why don't you do that since you brought it up? It's fair enough.
So we did meet on I think it was a Wednesday at about 8 in the morning, 8:30, and we were there till I think about 1 or 1:30 at a council retreat, and that's when we come up with the strategic plan.
And actually, this time around, it was sort of an extension and outgrowth of work we did in August too, the smaller group of us. So there was quite a few hours behind this.
Yeah.
Good point. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. That brings us to item 9H. Adopt ordinance 1478, amending the zoning district boundary map for the project site to allow for the pre-zoning and annexation of the project site involving the adjoining county parcels to 17 Cranfield Avenue, and adopt a resolution making a determination of a property tax exchange pursuant to provisions of Chapter 282, Section 59, Part .05, implementation of Article 13A of the California Constitution, commencing with Sections 95, Division 1 of the Revenue and Taxation Code for the county properties adjoining the property at 17 Cranfield Avenue, otherwise known as APNs number 049-072-020, 049-072-030, 049-072-120, and 049-072-320. And since I was the one who pulled this off the consent, my only reason for doing that is I don't even have any questions, but having voted against this when we were discussing it, I wanted the opportunity to vote against it here. But if anybody else has questions, all right. Is there a motion?
Mr. Mayor, make a motion. Mr. City Attorney, read the ordinance.
Here, I think you can use this. Isn't that this one?
Oh, okay. Okay, I'll read the red then. It's the same, I'm sure. But anyway, I'll make a motion to approve consent item 9H and ordinance 1478, an ordinance of the City Council, of the City of San Carlos City Council, amending the zoning district boundary map for the project site to allow for the pre-zoning and annexation of the project site involving the adjoining county parcel to 17 Cranfield Avenue, APN 049-072-020, 049-072-030, 049-072-120, and 049-072-320.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, Crystal, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Collins? Yes. Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
No.
Mayor Obert?
No. All right, that brings us to item.
Excuse me. Resolution, Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, on this one also, there's a resolution.
I apologize. No, please.
Can I make a motion to approve resolution number 2014-101,
101.
resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos, making determination of the property tax exchange pursuant to provisions of Chapter 282, Section 59, Part .05, implementation of Article 13A of the California Constitution, commencing with Section 95, Division 1 of the Revenue and Taxation Code for the county properties adjoining the property at 17 Cranfield Avenue, APN 049-072-020, 049-072-030, 049-072-120, and 049-072-320.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Would Bob like a glass of water?
Yes. Where's the commas? Yeah.
Seeing none, Crystal, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
No.
Mayor Albert?
No. That now brings us to 9K. Thank you for catching that, Bob.
No problem.
Adopt a resolution accepting a grant of easement for sewer utilities improvements and approving the contract for purchase from Zaco Commercial LLC and authorizing the city manager to sign and record the public utilities easement. Ron, I believe you were the one who pulled this.
I did. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I noticed that there was a request for $50,000 to Zaco Commercial for the purpose of a public utility easement. I'm just wondering why we have $7.1 million in that fund. That's really my only question. There must be...
I think it's a Jay Walter question.
I guess there's a lot of capacity that we need to take care of.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Collins, actually, I thought that budget number might generate some questions, but the basis for it is the capacity assurance plan that the council approved several years back and then authorized increase in sewer rates to collect money for that account. Essentially, it was around $9 million when we got started. And so we have, in the process, spent about $4.5 million or so on improvement projects already. This next project, which is requires the need for the public utility easement, will probably be in the range of another $5 to $6 million as we go forward. However, in the subsequent years, we've collected some additional money into the capacity assurance account from the sewer rate increases that we've had, and that's the reason for the healthy budget there. So that project will go forward, and then we'll have another one on its heels to follow with continuing sewer improvements.
Thank you.
Jay, basically, my understanding of this is that we didn't break out separately the easement acquisition costs. It's all buried in the overall cost of the project, correct?
That's correct.
So I take it that you presumably are managing the projections on this so that you make sure that we don't run out of money someplace down the road.
Yes.
And Rebecca's ready to whap you on the knuckles if you start getting close.
Absolutely correct.
Okay, good.
Yes, we're
No, I know you will get
forward.
close, but I always worry about that because, if you have this huge pot of money and things keep changing, somebody has to be managing how the projections versus what's really there, or you run into problems. Thank you. I will entertain a motion.
All right. My question being answered. I will move adoption of the resolution of the City Council of City of San Carlos, resolution number 2014-102. Resolution of the City of San Carlos accepting a grant of easement for sewer utilities improvements and approving the contract for purchase from Zaco Commercial LLC and authorizing the city manager to sign and record the public utilities easement.
There is a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, Crystal, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. And with that, we have a couple of minutes left. Greg, I wanted to ask, since this is our first meeting at the dais, would it be inappropriate to ask if there were things that council members or staff members had noticed about the way things are working that we ought to tweak? Or
Those sound to me like a factual discussion of issues you'd like to have us look at for the next meeting. But I would recommend keeping it brief to just direction to staff that each